Legends, welcome to the Willy Show. Thank you for spending some time with myself and my guest today. As this is a free show, if you want to personally support the show, follow the link in the description, or to freely support it, if you watch the episodes on YouTube, YouTube will split some of the advertising profit with me, helping me out, grow the show, make it better equipment, get more places with it. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Have a great day.
Terrible.
Cheers.
But so, Dan Pronk, welcome to the new studio.
Mate, it is fantastic to be here. It's been far too long since we caught up.
I know. Well, I was actually trying to think on my walk back because Dan was waiting at the front of my house. When I came back, I'm like, oh, shit.
I often wait out the front of your house, Willy. Yeah,
Yeah,
most of the time.
yeah, that's all right.
I'm there, mate.
I was like, when was the last time we caught up? Was it the podcast or did we catch up after that to talk selection? Around at your place.
I reckon we've caught up since in the Blue
We
Voodoo.
must.
Yeah, but it's a while ago now. Yeah, too long.
Those aren't unaware. The Blue Voodoo's Dan Pronk's lounge bar.
Yep, Man Cave.
Man Cave?
Man Cave, maybe, yep.
It's fucking awesome.
Well, the original Blue Voodoo, I cannot claim credit for that name. So the Blue Voodoo Lounge, and I couldn't tell you who named it originally, but it was in the regimental aid post on Camp Russell in Tarankat, Afghanistan, the Special Operations Task Group base there. The ready room within the med centre was the Blue Voodoo Lounge.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there was a big sign that someone had hoped to bring that back. I'm not sure if it ever came home, but anyway, that was the original Blue Voodoo, and so that's where the name came from.
Yeah, bloody hell. And your one's very, very impressive for those who haven't seen it.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
On Instagram, in there talking some shit, drinking. Old fashions is your go-to, is it? Or
Yeah, look, it
one
has
of?
been for a while. Yep, don't mind an old fashioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked about having a whiskey together. It's not every day we can, but I've actually got sent a special bottle. Because there actually was whiskey arrived last time you came on the podcast. Someone was like, hey, you're doing a podcast with Pronky. Sean Patson was like, I've dropped a bottle at your door. And he hit it, I think he half hit it. And we never actually got to it. I looked and I was like, well, I can't find the bottle that we were meant to drink.
Oh, right, true.
So
That's
it's
it.
actually it's actually not this one. There's another one. I think I've been through that bottle since. It's
I
been
was going to say, mate, that's
probably
it, yeah.
12 months. Oh, yeah, I love you, but I'm not. Yeah, I'm not waiting out that
I understand. I
long.
understand.
But this one was sent to me from a guy, pretty much on Instagram. He's like, hey man, we've talked to him a little bit, and he's like, hey, there's a bottle at this random Dan Murphy's for you. And next time you have a special occasion, crack it open and have a drink.
Oh,
so
awesome.
I figure this is going to be enough of a special occasion. Would you somewhere?
Mate, I appreciate it. I really do.
No.
And Sean, thank you.
Yeah. Well,
And
Sean's bottle was delicious. It was meant to be for
Good.
us. But
Yeah, I appreciate the sentiment, Sean. Yeah.
the sentiment got taken by Willy drinking Pronky's stuff. So I'm not
I
a
hope you enjoyed
massive
it.
whiskey connoisseur. I just drink whatever. But as far as I know, this is meant to be pretty good.
Magic. Well, as we were saying just before, I'm in the midst of a sober October, but cannot pass up this opportunity to share a whiskey with you, mate.
Yeah, I'm stoked. So,
Cheers.
yeah, appreciate it. So I guess last time we spoke, it was it's nice.
Very good.
Very good. It was just after, or maybe 6 months after you'd released Average 70 Kilogram Dickhead.
Okay, that's a while ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it have to be 18 months since we've chatted.
Yeah.
I guess how much has that book changed things for you since that's come out and guys have, I guess, got to know you a little bit more than just the rumour mill on the digger fucking net?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's been a really fun project, and the engagement has been fantastic.
Yeah.
It was very much a passion project, I suppose. It was just something that I enjoyed doing. I've enjoyed writing for some time now, and I've written some stuff in the past, little blog articles, some articles for magazines and other blogs and even journals, and written some longer stuff that is not yet appropriate for publication. I'll come back and edit things as in the future. But that project was just good fun, a way of capturing a few lessons learned, trying to engage the audience that I'd gathered online and just put that out there with a few lessons learned. And it was really a rewarding process going through the creative process of writing the book and then going through the iterations of recording the audio book. So I very much enjoyed that, I guess, the art of creating that, and then the happy end result was that it got a fair bit of buy-in, and there was it sort of, and continues to get a really good response. And so it's been a really gratifying project. It's allowed me to engage with a lot of people that I otherwise wouldn't have had engagement with, and so it's been great fun. Yeah,
it's bloody. I know all the guys. I've put a couple of guys onto it, but a lot of guys at work particularly, it's resonated with. But I think as well, I guess for me, it actually challenged a lot of my thought process on the stuff. I guess you're a more senior operator and an older guy. It challenged a lot of how I look at things in it, and particularly I guess the line of when you were talking about you came out of a restaurant with one of your kids and gave like some people some money, and you sort of challenged the belief that like if you were to give someone on the street or homeless whatever money, that you have some responsibility if they spend that on drugs or alcohol or whatever, and you basically challenging, well, you fucking don't. You've given that away. That's now their decision. And there was a few things like that in the book that I guess challenged, like happily challenged the way I guess me and a lot of other, particularly guys I hang out with my age or younger, particularly at work, challenged the way I think we view the world.
Yeah. No, thank you for saying that, and that's really gratifying. Once again to hear that has got you thinking. That was the hope with putting some of that stuff down, and it was stuff that hasn't been inherent to me either. It's those sort of things I've come around to, and I guess as we all age, you start to look at the world from different perspectives, and having kids really changes the perspective. And for me, having some of the military experiences and seeing some third world war zones has really metamorphosized my perspective on how good we've got it, and that has really changed the way that I behave. It really has. It's fundamentally changed me as a human being in terms of things like money, and there's been other bits and pieces along the way. And I'm a really keen reader, as you are, and I listen to a lot of audio books and take a lot of that on. And more recently, a lot of the Buddhist sort of philosophies are really resonating with me, and just those principles, things like money. And there's I hope I'm getting her name right, Jen Sincero, I believe her name is, an author, wrote a series of books that had badass in the title, but there was one something like you are a badass at managing money or something like that, and she spoke of money as like an energy and not something you need to hoard, something that sort of flows to you and can flow away from you, and you shouldn't be so hung up on trying to stockpile this stuff. And that really resonated with me. I think it's a great way of thinking about it. And yeah, coming back to the Buddhist philosophies of there's one, and once again, I hope I'm not getting this wrong to any Buddhists in your audience, but just basically that we never really own anything. We're the custodians of things, and we shouldn't get too attached, particularly to material possessions. They come and go, we come and go, and cars are a great example. We were talking cars earlier, and you like your cars, I do too. We're both lucky enough to have our own impression of nice cars, but there was someone who owned my car before me owning it, and someone will own it after I own it. And if you look at it that way as more of a rental that you enjoy while you have it, same with your houses, all your other possessions, and money's no different. It comes and goes. Enjoy it, use it positively, but try not to get too attached to anything materialistic, because I think that's a great philosophy.
It is, and it is, I guess, challenging, even to people like myself. Money is put on a pedestal, particularly money. Yeah. And I guess it's easy to do because we work for money, we do stuff for money, everything costs money. But if you start looking at it as you're just a custodian of something, it's something, I guess there's something almost relaxing about that, about like, it's not forever.
Yeah.
It's just, and money coming and going. And I think that's something I'll learn more once I'm older, because I guess being young, it's just trying to build money because you're just like, fuck, I've got nothing.
Yeah.
But I guess I talk to a lot of older people, 10, 15, 20 years on me, who are like, well, it comes and goes. I've lost money. I've made money. I've fucked up with money. I've made good decisions. It's an interesting little way of going about it.
It really is, and I think we have a tendency to link money with happiness. And you'll hear the cliched, money can't buy happiness, and all that sort of business. But I guess once again, having seen, as you have, the poverty in places like Afghanistan, and seeing, and kids are a great example. The world around, you can go to any third world country and you'll see these happy, smiley little kids that have nothing, and here we get so bogged down in this must have, keeping up with the Joneses type world, and this idea that if we just have the next model of car or the bigger house or the insert materialistic possession here, that we'll be happy. But it's a false metric, and it's really not where it's at all. And yes, I guess I'm starting to get a bit better at realizing that happiness and money are somewhat aligned, but they're certainly not one equals the other.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I guess particularly dealing with kids in somewhere like Afghanistan, I've always said that kids' laughter is universal. Yeah. Like, they don't laugh differently, although we speak differently, different traditions, whatever. Kids are just kids. Yeah. And it's funny seeing kids in somewhere like Afghanistan, incredibly religious country, very strict on a lot of stuff. You'll find, little girls lifting up their burqas and kids, and it's like it would just be with a different background than playing in a playground. It's no different.
Yep.
And I guess that's something so, sweet about a country like that. It's like, well, no one's born bad in many ways. A lot of it is, some of it's learnt. But also most of these people are fantastic, kind, caring people, even if they might get a bit of a bad rap here and there.
Yeah, for sure. And you're exactly right. I mean, we learn all our behaviours somewhere along the line. I guess there's a degree of genetics that goes into our value system, but it's your upbringing, isn't it? And when you're a kid and you're small and pure, and you don't yet understand that unfortunately that Western tendency to compare yourself to others and then work out some form of your interpretation of a pecking order and those kind of things. And so, yeah, if you can get the little kids at that magic age and you've seen it in Afghanistan, East Timor, places like that, where they're just really inquisitive and they just want to see the white people coming along, and they're really interested. And the other, I mean, some of my real the real pleasures of being a medical person in those environments was being able to do small gestures for those kids, when they were in a bit of trouble medically, or they had something going on that was in the first world pretty easy to treat, but in the third world it was one of their endemic diseases, and being able to treat that, and then small gifts like water bottles or a pen or something like that a kid in Australia would just discard. It's a real treasure to them. And I remember giving a little kid way out in regional Afghanistan, and this little fella, he was intellectually impaired clearly, and we'd done a patrol, we'd cleared this village, and was pretty benign, and he came over and he was fascinated. He was collecting our empty water bottles, and I had a Mars bar, and it was summer over there. This thing was melted, but I gave it to this little guy, and just the look on this little fella's face when he tasted that Mars bar was just unbelievable. Like, it was just, but once again, giving a kid a melted Mars bar in Australia, he'd probably chuck it out and wouldn't even bother to open it. But just those little moments, I think, are just very special.
Mm. Would you say that some of that stuff is, I guess, the most fond you look back for in defence? Because I guess you've done so much through your career, everything from working in medical centres through to being in the SAS. But if you look back at your career of like the best things you've done, do you sort of think of more those moments rather than firefights and sort of the door kicking stuff?
Yeah, look, for sure. I mean, I look back at it holistically as just being this incredibly privileged opportunity to have been in the right units at the right time when things were going on internationally. Australia was involved, and so it was a really professionally, the whole thing was a very professionally rewarding period of my life. And I guess there was different facets of it that really resonate, and there was some really high highs and some really low lows, and it's hard to kind of say what were my favourites and what weren't. You know, there was some pretty terrible things at the time that I now look back on that I can see have changed me fundamentally as a person for the better. And so with hindsight, and I know you've spoken about this with your diagnosis, it's, you know, it's a horrendous blow, but it gives you a new perspective, and you've spoken about that, and to, you know, to a significantly lesser degree, I've had those experiences that have changed me, but certainly the stuff that, and then there was, I did find the combat very stimulating, and I really, it sounds odd, and it's you know, I know not everyone had the same experience in those environments, but I really enjoyed it, strangely. Like, it was, I guess, from the perspective of, it was the ultimate environment within which to test your skill set, particularly if there was casualties there. And I'd very deliberately manoeuvred myself into that position to be there to try and, you know, exercise those skills in that environment. And so that was very stimulating. But yeah, in terms of the professionally rewarding from a medical perspective, it was most often the more trivial medical management of little kids and things like that, rather than the management of massive injuries that really, really, I guess I look back fondly on.
It's funny you mentioned about, you know, going through stuff that makes you a better person at the other end. And you and me spoke, I think it was you and me on the phone. We were on the phone for like 2 hours, only a couple of weeks ago. Chatting about how it's funny because some of the worst situations make you a better person, and there's almost in some of them a bit of guilt. We spoke about, you know, something terrible happening to someone you can learn so much out of, and it's almost like you're taking so much good out of someone's misfortune as well. Like, I'm lucky in my way that it, you know, it all happened to me and I learned through my own stuff. And I've spoken to a lot of people in defence who are like, yeah, well, you know, this guy dying or this happening actually was the worst and best thing to ever happen to me, because it made me reevaluate everything in my life.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I have discussed this a lot with other people that I worked with over the years in the military, and this guilt is probably the right term of particularly medical people. There'd be times where we were involved in resuscitations and failed resuscitations that ended in people passing away. But if you have performed well in that environment and you've gone through your sequence and you might have done a few interventions that went well, things like maybe a surgical airway or a chest tube, or some of these interventions that you don't get a chance to do all the time. And if those skills have been there for you at the time under duress and you've been able to achieve them, even though the end outcome might be a disastrous one for the patient, you could walk away from those resuscitations feeling quite elated and professionally validated. And I found that left me at times with this real conflict of, well, hang on a sec, how can I feel great about what's just happened? And I guess that's an internal thing. That's a validation of your own skill set in that environment, but yet the outcome was oftentimes the death of someone. And so you had this real conflict there that I've grappled with a little bit in a few cases, and I know friends of mine have as well, where you walk away thinking, yeah, I did really well there, but the end result was a disaster. So it's a strange thing, isn't it?
Yeah. When it was a fellow, you know, soldier, brother in arms, injured, did you have to have, I guess, a level of removal from the situation, as far as, this isn't Willy I'm working on, this is a patient. It doesn't matter who it is, what it is, I'm just going through the methods to not let, I guess, your emotions get the better of you while it's happening, just so you're stepping through the correct motions?
Yeah, look, I found that came extremely naturally. I found that in those situations, and it didn't matter if it was one of our guys, if it was a civilian, if it was an enemy combatant, there was a programmed response that was programmed into unconscious competence. You know, we had so many brilliant people invest so much into us before we went into that environment to make sure we were ready. And I really didn't appreciate that at the time, I don't think, but I look back now and I think, geez, there was a lot of selfless people who were giving their time and energy and skills to empower us to go and and perform my duties in that job. And I would find, particularly in the settings where it was one of our guys, that you'd roll in and it would just be a sequence of procedures. It was a problem that needed to be solved. And I recall actually vividly in one instance with a guy who'd one of our guys struck an IED, and unfortunately we couldn't save him. But I remember the realisation that this was who it was happening, and it was probably about 15 or maybe even 20 minutes into the resuscitation, the attempted resuscitation was holy shit, is this such and such? And up until that point, it had just been, get to the incident site, assess casualties, start management, go through this sequence, hasn't worked, okay, go to this, do this, is it this, exclude that, and then it was. I remember that vividly. And that's in nearly 10 years ago now, but I can still picture it clearly. And it was this sort of this kind of strike of lightning. Holy shit, this is such and such. But even then, it wasn't really an overwhelming emotion. It was just a realization that this isn't just some problem to be solved. This is a bloke who I'd actually had dealings with just a few hours earlier when we were evacuating another couple of guys that had got a bit dinged up. And so, yeah, look, I never, and likewise with treating enemy combatants that were incapacitated but not killed. I never had any emotion there to the negative. It never occurred to me not to treat them. They were a wounded human being, just like our guys, and so the emotion wasn't either strongly positive or strongly negative at all in those situations. It was almost robotic, and I think that was just a byproduct of that incredible investment of training that had been put into us that allowed us to click into that response mode under duress.
Just going through the drills of it.
Yeah, well, it almost was, and there was, and I've had this discussion with a lot of my mates who did similar sort of stuff in those environments, and it was, we had been trained to a level of such a high level of such complexity. The combination of all of our training in our pre-deployment medical scenarios were so complex and so long, with so many casualties, with so many injuries, that it was sort of so stressful, and so that stress inoculation was fantastic, that by the time you got there and did it for real, it was often very simple. Like it's like, just one gunshot wound, and because which really allowed you to, for the most part, allowed people to function really well in that environment.
Well, I guess that falls to the old, you won't rise to the occasion, you'll fall to the level of your training.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Archilochus, if I'm not mistaken, was the one who came up with that. But you're exactly right, and it's been fascinating recently. I've had cause to revisit a lot of the literature around what's going on in your neural networks when you're learning skill acquisition, and that transition from conscious competence, so being able to do a skill, however needing your executive function, like your frontal lobes thinking about it, to then drive, in this instance, a motor task, so to drive your body to do this and to think about, right, I need to get, maybe a tourniquet out, I need to do this, I need to put it on that way, I need to clip it up, I need to twist it up and look for the bleeding, all that kind of stuff, to that unconscious competence where you're so well trained in it that your brain pushes that, sort of delegates that task to your automatic areas of your brain, so you can do it without engaging your executive function of your brain. It just happens on autopilot, and that then frees up that executive function to be doing other things, to be thinking about the situational awareness, the tactical environment, and it's incredible when you stop to think about it, because a lot of what we do in day-to-day life is exactly that. It's you're unconsciously competent. You can be driving your car on autopilot, and a good example is, I think anyone who drives will know this. You turn up somewhere and you think, geez, I don't remember getting there. You haven't remembered shifting the gears. You might be driving through traffic lights and they are green, you're going through, but nothing's registering consciously, and you turn up because you're lost in thought elsewhere. And this is that unconscious competence. And if you train a skill enough, you can drive it into that unconscious, what they call bottom-up approach. So it's being driven by the automatic areas of the brain rather than a top-down, requiring your high-order functions.
Yeah. And I guess, like you mentioned, that opens your mind up to having the other skills open up. So if you're doing your care of the battle casualty, just instinctively doing shit, then, you have that. You can still be situationally aware, tactically aware,
Yep.
And that just makes you such a better operator on the ground and much more efficient as well.
Yeah, and that was very much the emphasis of the training pipeline, that when I eventually got a bit more up the ranks and started to drive a bit more of that training, I started to cotton on to that's what we were looking for in our combat medics, to be trained to that level where you could have them engaged in a really high fidelity, high stress, reality-based training scenario, and you could stand over them and say, right, tell me, give me your 9-liner, so give me your casualty information, and they could continue doing what they were doing and give you that 9-liner. Or you could say, where are you sighting your landing zone for the AME bird, and they could keep doing what they're doing and say, 3 compounds down on the left, we saw a clearing where you could bring a Black Hawk in, these sort of things. Whereas you could tell, and this was a test that I used, when they weren't quite there, they could be going through the motions, and to look at them, they looked fantastic. They looked like they had it all sorted. But then you stand over them and say, right, let's have your 9-liner, and they'd have to stop what they were doing and to give you the 9-liner, and you'd sort of say, well, treat your casualty, mate, and they'd go back to it and stop talking, and so you could kind of turn them on and off because they just didn't have the executive function bandwidth, if you like, to do both at once.
Yeah, it's interesting with the level of training where you go through that. I know, talking to a couple of guys at, I guess, the pinnacle of the careers, SAS, 2 commando sort of regiments, when they talk about training compared to the infantry. And they're like, well, no, our urban drills and these drills, they're all the exact same.
Yeah, of course.
It's just that your singleton is 15 months to become a qualified infantryman, where, we do 18 months of the same drills. And it's just built to that, when we do our urban clearances, it doesn't look differently. It's just because we do a week of urban in the School of Infantry and they've done months of urban, it's unconsciously thinking, opening that brain up to have other thoughts come through rather than just drill, drill, drill.
Well, and I think you'd find the exact same level of competence in a well-trained infantry soldier. I mean, beyond question. And I think it's not, I don't see in my mind a clear delineation between particularly Australian infantry, who are world class. There's an outstanding batch of soldiers, and a well-trained infantryman, and then a special operator. It all exists on a continuum. I don't see there as being a clear delineation. It's just they've just moved in a different direction. Rather than staying in infantry, they've gone across. Well, they're still infantry, but rather than staying at a battalion, they've gone across to one of the regiments and just progressed from there. And exactly as you said, it's not. It's the same people that move between all these units. It's not like you kind of breed someone that's different to go into special operations than goes into a infantry battalion. And it is just the emphasis and the training, the resource allocation to allow the enhancement of that skill set. And so, yeah, I'm sure you would well, I'm absolutely positive that you'd find people that are as competent in their proficiencies in the regular army as you do in special operations.
It's funny that when you get, a bit further down your career, especially in infantry units, and then you start knowing, because when you first start, the special forces units are just unheard of, like, oh, they fucking Superman. Yeah. But as you get further down your career and you start knowing guys who are in the regiment, and then guys that go into the regiment, like, he was just one of us.
Yeah.
With the drive and passion to do it. Well, it's not Superman. Yeah. It's just one of the boys has chosen a different path.
You're exactly right. And I think because it is shrouded in secrecy, and there's the operational security component, and then you get the media, the social media, and it all plays into this massive amplification of what this public perception of a special operator is. And exactly as you just said, when you start to get a look at what a special operator is, all it is just a soldier who's chosen and had the correct conditions and the right attributes to be able to move in that direction in their career. And that's plain and simple. They're like I said earlier, they're not a different breed. They're not superhumans. They're just people that chose that and had a drive to do it, and also had a set of life circumstances that allowed them to pursue what is a somewhat selfish career in a lot of ways, you know, and so it's just the same group of people headed in a different direction.
Yeah, and I guess have made, you know, sacrifices of other choices and opportunities to take that. You mentioned, you know, it's a selfish career choice. And there's lots of choices like that people make. You know, it's the same as going into business, going into lots of things. There's so many selfish choices that can be made. Did you find many that you felt like that when you really chose to take up that?
Look, I've only realised a lot of this with hindsight, and that is, I say it's somewhat embarrassed, to be honest, at the lack of deep engagement with my kids when they were very young, and I only realise that now since our third child, because I've been there for his whole life. So I got out of the army shortly after he was born, and then I've been home a lot more, and I've been there for the Christmases and for the birthdays, and haven't missed all of that. And I look back to when our first son was born, and I was so focused on going into special operations that I feel that I probably missed a lot of this, you know, the magic of having your first kid. Unquestionably, I love the little fella, and of course, you know, having your first kid is a magic moment, but my attention was divided, and my focus was divided because I'd set myself on this trajectory that I hoped would end in a special operations career, and that didn't allow, it was not an all or nothing, but, you know, it had to be where most of my attention lay for long periods of time there, and to make that happen. And so it's only with hindsight, I didn't realise it at the time because I was so focused, but with hindsight I realised, geez, you know what, I put my wife under a hell of a lot of stress, and you know, God bless her, she was fantastic about it, didn't like it, hated the army and everything it stood for, was decidedly unimpressed by me achieving whatever I might have achieved. You know, that didn't impress her whatsoever, God bless her. But yes, I mean, to a degree now I see this responsibility to try and make up for that. Not that you ever can, but to change my ways and to really tip the balances right back in the favour of family stuff while my kids are still young, and really engage there.
I guess talking, and I've spoken to you a lot about and getting contacts as well for guys getting into special forces. I think that's not the only reason we talk, but a lot of it pops up because we're both bloody busy people. Yeah, it's funny because we both stuff each other around on email a little bit. Like, oh, sorry, man, I've been
lots of phone tag,
flat out and this and that. But one of the big ones is helping particularly young men get into those units. Do you find, I guess, a lot of sort of appreciation of, I guess, holding the candle a little bit, getting, like, helping guys into units which you've worked for and put a lot of effort into?
Yeah, it's for me, it's a real privilege that people would reach out to me and then would listen to what I have to say and you know, treat it with credibility that's a real privilege for me, and it is something that I draw a huge amount of satisfaction out of, to think that I might be able to, in some tiny way, help people on their pathway to what they want to achieve. It's something that I had people do for me when I was like looking at that ambition, and I reached out to people, and it's almost, for me, it was almost like these people were giving me permission to dream this dream. It was, and I found it was the funniest thing, in that anyone who was within special operations or who had been there and done it before me, it was universally, they were encouraging me to do it. They were like, yeah, do it, man. And they were sort of saying the same stuff that I now find myself when I have the opportunity to engage with people who are going for special unit selection between police or military, and just demystifying it, because it can be overwhelming. We were talking about before, this black box and no one really knows, and you hear these horrible stories about selection courses and wonder how anyone could pass, and to be able to demystify that and break it down for these people, and then just, I guess, allay some of their fears and point them in some of the what I think are the right directions. I think a lot of people massively underestimate the psychological preparation and the psychological resilience that's required, and focus far too much on the physical fitness aspect of it, which is critically important. But it's most people will withdraw from those courses well before they're physically exhausted or broken, and so it's plain and simple. It's a mind game that they're failing to play well when they withdraw. But yes, I mean, it is a huge privilege to be involved with those people. And once again, drawing back to, I'm sort of banging on a lot about the Buddhist philosophies, but there's another principle there that my interpretation of is that any knowledge that you have acquired, it's like the materialistic possessions, it's not yours, you know? I mean, someone's given it to you, and then you have an obligation to pass it on to someone else. And so once, like material possessions, you don't want to hoard that knowledge to try and be powerful. You want to share it with as many people as you can. And like I said, I had a lot of fantastic mentors and role models who were really, and for me as a junior doctor with no military background, from having done a 30-second course at Duntroon to learn to be an army officer, to have the audacity to step on selection, there was a lot of people there that quite rightly thought this isn't going to work, you're not going to get through. And then there was a handful of people who said, hey, you know what? Yeah, do it. Don't listen to anything that those other people are saying. Just go and fucking do it. And to have that is, at that time in my life, was just fantastic. And it was a massive motivator. And then to think that I now am in a position to be able to maybe offer that to someone else is just brilliant.
And I guess, and I'm in a little bit of a spot like that with some of the stuff I do, particularly online, helping people, find a bit of clear direction, especially young people just joining defence in general.
Yeah.
And I get so much pleasure out of it. I get so many guys, and I've got like a couple today of guys, the video is them driving at the gates of Kapuka. Like, I'll never be fucking back here. And messages like, oh, you really helped me get here.
Yeah.
But I'm always very clear with it. Like, no, you did all the work. I wasn't there making the fucking bed.
Yeah.
Or doing that. It was a little bit of a, like you said, almost, not inspiration is maybe the wrong word, but reassuring them that, no, you can do this.
Yeah.
There's not like a secret pill somewhere to get in. You can just sign up and do it.
Yeah, it's almost that permission, isn't it? That and it's a funny thing to think that you would seek that permission from a stranger on the internet, but people do, and it's I guess people are reaching out, as I was, for that validation that what they think might be possible. And if you can find someone who's done it before you, and then you can touch base with them and get that real life validation back that, hey, yeah, this can be done. Here's how I did it, and here's how you can do it. I'm no different to you, and I did it. So it's a really special thing. It really is. And it's a real, I say the word privileged a lot because that's how I feel in life across the board. But yeah, it is. And like you say, it isn't us. They're the ones that are still stepping up and going through Kapuka. They're the ones still stepping up and going through selection courses. And I've had that unbelievably gratifying experience where people have gotten through these courses and then gotten in touch. I had a couple of blokes who, the second they got their phone back, they rang me as the first person. I'm like, holy shit, don't ring me, man. Like, ring your family. Like you said, it's not. I didn't do anything other than just, I guess, maybe put a tiny bit of a fan on the flame, but it was them, but they massively overvalue this contribution that we might have made. And so, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'd say it's some of the best stuff I've done in my career. That having some guys reach out being like, hey, I got through Singleton because of you, which they didn't. Yep. They might have used a bit of, like you said, a bit of fan to the flame.
Yeah.
But in many ways, I actually get more out of it than when I marched at FCO. I guess because it's like, well, I knew what I was doing and I did this, it was just me day to day.
Yep.
With these guys, I'm like, fuck, that's, giving a little bit to the next generation of soldiers that will do what I haven't done and will do when we'll go further, I'm sure. Especially, I guess we use the word privilege a lot, which is a good word for it. And it is a privilege to be just in the Defence Force in general.
Yeah.
A lot can't do as well. And I think I've put more on it too, that I'm getting medically separated. And I don't have the privilege sort of God gifted to me. Like, you sort of just take it for granted. Once you're in for a while, you're just there. That, it is a real privilege to be able to do it. And I've spoken a lot with yourself too about the disappointment of not being able to do the selection courses.
Yeah.
And I guess I talk to a lot of guys at work, like, do it and fail. I wish I could have gone and failed. I wish I had the privilege to fail the course day 1, hour 1.
Yeah.
I wasn't given that opportunity to actually test. And I speak pretty in depth, I guess, to a lot of guys at work about, I wish in hindsight, me looking down the road of leaving defence and with medical issues and whatever, I wish that I'd gone and failed, even if it was day 1. At least I wouldn't have this what if syndrome. It was, it wasn't going to be.
Yep.
But I think I would have dealt with going and failing and going, well, it's not for me, rather than the unknown. I think the unknown is a cruel beast in many ways.
Yeah, agree completely. And something I am probably most scared of is that dying wondering, that not having had a go. And like you, I had that attitude going into the course that I'm going to give this thing my best shot, and one of several things is going to happen. By the time I turned up, I was so invested in the goal, I was pretty sure I wasn't going to withdraw our own request. You never know till you're there, of course, but I was pretty confident that was not going to happen. I was resigned to the fact that I might get injured or I might get kicked off the course, if they might have just seen something in me they didn't like and removed me from the course, or I might have gotten to the end and not gotten picked up, and they'd all be gut-wrenching. However, I think you could reconcile that over time, exactly like you just said, as, well, you know what, I had a go and I wasn't what they were looking for, or I broke my ankle, or I, just was not the right fit for that unit. But that not trying, I think, is a terrible thing if you look back and the window's shut and you live with that regret. And I guess in your setting, it's not that you're not trying, it's been robbed from you, which is just the universe has interdicted and just sets you on a different path. And so, hopefully that's reconcilable for you. This isn't you that's not done it. This is circumstance that's kind of got in the way. Yeah,
in many ways, but I'm just a bold prick in so many things like that. It's like, because I'm not fully accepting of I am realistic about the tumour, but I'm not accepting of it, because I'm like, no, I'm not going to accept it all, because then I'd accept the survival rate and this bullshit and everything else. Well, no, fuck that.
Yep.
I'm going to, in an attempt to defeat odds, I guess, and just go through.
Yeah.
Because there's so much that I do that, like, you shouldn't do that. I'm like, yeah, but like, at the end of the day, it's like you said, it's one of several things is going to happen. That we take chance with everything.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's a weird one, and I talk a lot about, I guess, with tumours too, with cancers, that it's easier to live with. Like, my tumour's just a genetic mutation, but if I smoked for 20 years and got a cancer, I wouldn't be as able to live with it either, because it'd be like, well, I did this to myself too. It's a hard one when you have no impact on it, but maybe harder if you did have an impact on it.
Yeah, that's interesting you should say that, and it makes me think of my dad, who died of lung cancer, and admittedly it's a very different perspective when he was 73 years old, I think, when he died, and he was a long-term smoker, hardcore long-term smoker, and he was very resigned to the fact that it was cause and effect. He smoked, got a cancer, died. That checked out for him. It's like, this is logical, and it probably would have been surprising if he hadn't have got lung cancer, to be honest. And obviously it was a different time then, but it's and I remember you saying when we spoke last time that you felt so ripped off initially because I think if I'm quoting you correctly, you were talking about most things in a young man's life are cause and effect. You do something dumb in your car, you crash it, you get injured, and there's cause and effect. You've done something, but this was all effect, no cause. You've just been handed this diagnosis and hadn't done anything to deserve it or create it or earn it, and there you go.
But I think that's where humans are very used to cause and effect.
Yeah.
And I think this is where the post-traumatic growth, I guess, comes from, is being able to flip that and having, I guess, effect and cause. So we're used to, like your example, you crash your car, you speed in your car, you crash your car, then whatever. But I guess the flipping of that with something like, I guess my situation or many others like it, is having something happen and then going, well, what can I make of it, if that makes sense? That the effect comes first. So the initial effect is you've got a terminal tumour. And then the cause can be, well, what, we can't change what's happened. Like crashing your car, you can't turn back the clock.
Yeah.
But what then can we make of this situation?
Yeah.
And that can go into so many, I guess, shit situations which you don't have much influence on. But you don't have influence on the initial something that's happened. But from every second after that, you're back to cause and effect of what you can do. It's just how the universe works, and you can make something of it or not. It's a harder one to do. It's fucking hard.
What you've just said. There's a whole bunch of points that are pinging in my brain, and the whole complexity. Science, so that complex adaptive systems, and my brother is well versed in this, and I've become aware of it through him and actually gotten right into it. And that's that. It just talks to the fact that we live in this complex environment, which is the modern day world, and this idea of cause and effect and everything being fair and linear and equal, and this happens, so therefore that happens, is just false. It's not a fair world. It is non-linear. Some random stuff happens, and to think that we can predict this world is not the right way of going about it. And like you say, you can then. It depends on your mindset and how you choose to react to those situations. And there's some fantastic stuff from the Stoic philosophers that talk to this, and Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and their crew that looked at the world and acknowledged, hey, it's not fair and it's not meant to be, and no one ever promised me a fair world. However, I'm going to take this hand that I'm dealt and I'm going to play it as best as I can. And that's not playing into that victim mentality. And that's like you say, with post-traumatic growth, that ability to take that trauma and use that as a bit of a launch pad to reach a better place because of that trauma. You've seen how bad things can get, and then if you can claw your way back to baseline, you can actually transcend it to say, well, I've seen some pretty terrible stuff, or this horrible thing has happened to me. I'm going to use that as fuel to live my best life possible and really engage in your relationships, because you can appreciate them more. And we've spoken about this. For me, that's in the form of seeing the devastation to family units from mates of mine who were killed in the field, seeing the devastation to parents who have lost their sons, to wives who have lost their husbands. And then that's, for me, translated into this, I got to do the best job I can of all of these things. Almost in a way, I feel I owe it to these blokes that didn't come home to do my best job of it, and to try and move past any of that sort of personal victimhood, if you like, and that, and I'm not trying to trivialize anyone who is struggling with trauma, and by any stretch at all, but for myself personally, that ability to frame it that way allowed me to say, hang on, this isn't about me, this is in terms of everyone look at me, I need attention, and I was lucky in that I was able to move through that period where I was kind of having a lot of recurring thoughts, and I had a strong family unit. There was a lot of positive things that allowed me to transition along that I'm aware a lot of people don't have, but that over time, that realization of, hey, you know what, I'm still here, I'm still going okay, I'm very lucky, I've got a good family unit that's intact, I'm physically intact, I haven't been shot or blown up, and so I need to crack on and do the very best I can in honour of those blokes who had that robbed from them.
And do you think that gives a lot to future stuff, I guess, of these guys had 60 years ahead of them robbed? It's my responsibility to put in maybe just a little bit more for them.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said earlier, you never know when you're going to get that diagnosis, or when you're going to get sideswiped by a semi-trailer, and all these things it's a nice ideal to live every day like it's your last. It's unrealistic though, isn't it? Otherwise you'd blow all your cash on.
It's funny. There's I actually put you onto him. I think I said Sam Harris. I think I sent you some links. Yeah. Mind blowing. But it's funny when you said, you never know when that diagnosis or getting sideswiped by a semi-trailer. of course you never know, but you know that one day it's going to. And he opens with that.
Yep.
Is we all know that, well, everyone knows they're not immortal.
Yeah.
But we all know that that diagnosis is coming, or that car is going to hit us, or the range of way people die.
Yep.
Thankfully, most very old. But we all know it's coming.
Yeah.
That there will be a day that you'll walk in somewhere and won't come back, or your whole life will change. We know it's coming.
Yep.
And I guess it's, once you accept that's going to happen, you might start making decisions and, well, actually, shit, I might do this because it may be tomorrow. Hopefully it's 50 years in the future, but it's coming at some point.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and thanks for putting me on to Sam Harris. I listened to, I can't recall the name of the audiobook. It was 20-odd hours long, and it was a series of his podcast interviews with these unbelievable intellects from around the world on consciousness and artificial intelligence and so many things. You know, it was absolutely phenomenal and just expands your thought processes on all of these topics. But it was in amongst one of them that they were talking about exactly what you just said. We all know we're going to die, but we're under this illusion that we've got time, and because we don't know when that's going to be, we assume that it's going to be a long way away, and it's not until it's drawn into focus by tragedy that everyone gets living, and you can burn so much of your time thinking, I'll just put this off to tomorrow, or I won't do this, or no, I won't go after that. Let's have a holiday next year, and then that's the stuff you're going to regret when things do get drawn into focus. But it is hopelessly tough if you go and live every day like it's your last. You burn through your bank account. Yeah, exactly right. In a week's time, and then so it's. I think there needs to be that happy medium, and that I think one of the main lessons I learned, and luckily enough with my dad, we had years from his diagnosis to when he died, and our family we're not religious, but I'd say we're spiritual, and I think my brother and I were raised with this view of death as not something that's a terrible tragedy. It's an inevitability, and just that there was always this emphasis that my brother and I have both inherited to try and just let people know you love them, live your best life and go out after things, take risks, make a fool of yourself, try and check your ego at the door and be enthusiastic about stuff. And then, like I said before, with my dad, he was very philosophical about his diagnosis, and he did everything he could right up until the point where it was clear it wasn't working. And then he's like, right, that's me done, time for palliation. And so it wasn't a tragedy by any stretch. And then his funeral was a really joyous occasion. It was this great celebration of his life, and I think that's a great way to go. And for me to have had that relationship with Dad, and then to have had those years where we knew he was going to die, where it got brought into focus that, hey, this is his terminal, it's just a matter of when, and the stopwatch was ticking, to then leave nothing unsaid to maximise the time we had with him, to make sure that we really maximise the experiences of him with his grandkids and me with him, and all those kind of things, just has allowed for his passing to be this leave this fantastic memory of a life well lived rather than a tragedy. So it's if you draw that back to your own life, and in light of the fact that we don't know when it's going to end, and just trying to, which is what I certainly do, just really engage with my kids and take those little moments and not kind of get distracted on my bloody Instagram account or something like that.
We all do it.
Yeah, of course you do, and it's the trap of social media. But just remembering that we've got this magic window, my wife and I, with the kids while they're still small, where we can have that fantastic relationship, and trying to capitalise on that while it's still here.
Mm. Yeah, Sam talks wonderfully about, I guess, that, and looking into, because he does a lot of, what's the word? Meditation.
Yeah.
And it's quite intense. It's not, sit down and focus on your breathing and whatever. He'll go on a month-long meditation camp, and that's all you do.
Yep.
And he talks about, we know, all we know is we've got now. And he actually talks in that one, the first one I said, he's like, all we know is we've got now and now. And he's like, and nothing other than this is, just hand it to us. That you'll get an awful reality check one day. And we know it's coming. And he talks a lot about consciousness and how he said things just tend to rise out of nothing. He said, you don't actively think of maybe what you're going to say next, and it just pops up. And him talking about consciousness and what it means, I guess, to each other is really, really interesting as far as meditating with it too.
Yeah, some of that stuff blows my mind, and particularly the discussion around where does consciousness exist within a person, and how do you know something else is conscious, and how do we define consciousness, and that thought that to be conscious, or for a being or another, creature or animal, to be conscious, you need to be able to understand what it would be like to be such and such, and I think there was a paper written, what's it like to be a bat, and it was just exploring consciousness through a different lens. And this idea that we have our own individual perception of what consciousness is, and we superimpose that on you. I assume that you have a similar perception, but yours might be completely different, and some of the lines of thought along artificial intelligence, when it reaches a point where we've got these humanoid cyborgs that even if that's the right, I don't know if that's the right term, but these God AIs that look like people, and they're really high fidelity, and you can't tell them from another human, and they're interacting with you as another human would. How do we know if they're conscious or not? And then some of the other lines of reasoning where they talk about people who we think of the consciousness as existing within the brain, perhaps, or within the mind, but then you can have a massive stroke that knocks out half of your brain and you can still be conscious. And so does the consciousness exist within substructures of the brain? It's a fascinating concept, and some of his discussions surrounding general anesthetic and losing track of time, and so having these periods where there is no consciousness and then you emerge again from it at the other end, as opposed to sleep, where if you have a sleep you have some concept that time has passed while you're asleep, but general anesthetic you don't have that, and so you are unconscious, whereas sleep's a deeper. It blows your mind, doesn't it? Fascinating.
It's incredibly fascinating, but I find it quite relaxing too. I got into a lot of his stuff and a few others like him, I guess, with my diagnosis and struggling down that path of, I guess, dealing with the unfairness of it. And I guess it goes into it's not unfair. It might be poor luck, but it's not, the why me's not a question worth asking because it has happened and it doesn't get you anywhere. And Hitchens, there's Christopher Hitchens fellow who died of esophagus cancer. He always talks about the why me question. He said is sort of a selfish, pointless question because there's no answer to it. And he said a lot of people have this recurring, and everyone who goes through a diagnosis like that does, or goes through a period of trauma. Why me? Why did my mate get killed? Or this? And he said you're not going to find an answer. Don't bother wasting your time on it, especially if the clock is maybe ticking a little bit faster on you. Then it's not worth putting the time into. And he said he was very selfish to ask it because he was a smoker and a drinker, and he got esophagus cancer. And he's like, "Why me?" Well, I can fucking tell you why. It was this, and he's like, "I chose that, and if I'll choose it again."
If you flip that one around, you get that "why not me," and that's that whole survivor guilt complex as well, isn't it? Where you have people, and I've seen it amongst people that I worked with who survived something that someone else didn't. A helicopter goes in and a few people die, but everyone else lives, or, a bomb goes off, someone dies, someone doesn't. And then you have that survivor guilt and that why not me kind of thing. And so, it's a fascinating part of the human condition. And I guess having that evolved neocortex, the thinking part of the brain that allows us to massively overanalyze all of these things. And it's something that once again Sam Harris talks to beautifully, just with all its benefits. It's also come with it all that ability to become depressed about things that have happened, anxious about things that may or may not ever happen, and to have that why me, why not me kind of thought process going on.
And I always put that I'm so lucky to have a foot up the arse every couple of months, because I have a new scan every 3 months, whatever it is. It was 2 months, then it was 4, but say 3. And I get that mortality check. I'm so much better for it because I get living in just, your own sort of little world. You're just going through the motions of life. And then, I think it takes you a couple of months to get into that. And then I have this like fucking pin drop moment of just, fuck, this is actually happening. I am going to die one day. This could potentially be speeding up that stopwatch. Holy fuck, I need to live. And it's a really good almost interval of 3 months, because it's like every 3 months, okay, well, I'm not going to blow a fucking bank account in this, but I need to fucking do something. And I think those mortality checks are so good for me, because there's a lot of people with very privileged lives, I guess, who have gone through very little trauma. And in many ways, it may not be a good long run thing, because when something big happens, then that's the first thing to happen. Where I'm very, I guess, privileged and grateful I get that mortality check, that near-death experience every couple of months, and a look in my own sort of soul, I guess, being like, oh, fuck, this is actually still happening. Right, what have I done these past 3 months? This, what aren't I happy with? Well, this, I didn't achieve this, I didn't do this. What if this is it? What if this is the scan where tomorrow I get my result and you've got a week? What if this is it? Okay, look back. Okay, I wasn't happy in this period. Okay, next 3 months I need to do this if I've got it. And recently, I guess more so than further back, I've been more and more content with the following 3 months.
Great.
So I've been like, oh, well, that, I did get that done. And if this was the last scan, am I happy? Well, I want to do this. It's not that I don't have goals. I could be 100 dying tomorrow and I'd still have, I want to do this. But would it be enough? And I'm like, yeah, maybe. And what can I build on in the next 3? And of course, I don't want anyone to live how I do on those 3 month blocks. But it's fucking good for me with how I am.
Yeah. Oh, look, absolutely. And it's another great, I think, life philosophy when you look at anything, and well, a couple of them actually. One that I like to frame things by is, will this matter in 5 years' time? And if the answer's no, then let's not get invested in it. I think that's a good one, because we can get bogged down in not so much minutiae, but real life issues that big picture aren't really going to make any difference. And so I think that's whereas if the answer is yes, then put energy into that. But also that the one, and it's pretty cliched as well, but if you're on your deathbed, are you going to look back and wish you had done this or done more of that or owned this or did that? And with particularly, I think, with materialistic possessions, when you look back, and I find myself thinking a lot about this now in this age where I've got my kids are 7, 9 and 13, just turned 13, all boys. And so fantastic ages to be a dad and to be doing dad stuff and trying to do the best I can to kind of move them into good young men. And I look at it and I think most people who have started families will hit this age and stage where they need to be working. You've got 3 lots of school fees, all these kind of things. You're trying to keep that family going, but that comes at a cost of investing time in the family. You're trying to pay off a mortgage and buy an investment property. You want a nice car, you want nice things, and that all keeps you running on the treadmill and keeps you away from the kids. And you hear it over and over with people on their deathbed looking back, saying, geez, I wish I had have, not bothered chasing this, or not tried to keep up with the Joneses, had I just spent more time with my kids, or done this, or been happier taking that holiday, had my mates over when the house was filthy, and all this sort of stuff stuff that matters. And trying to draw that back into focus and actually do some of that stuff as you go along is critically important. And like you say, you've got that reality check 3 monthly. Most people don't. So you can lose 10 years of your life and not have one of those reality checks. And exactly as you just said, it's not until something catastrophic happens that you realise, shit, I just wasted the last decade in the rat race. And now my kid's 20 years old's moved out of home and I can no longer influence them as an adult. And all these things that life gets in the way and you can miss if you're not consciously aware.
Yeah, the old Ferris Bueller, blink and you'll miss it.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the best movies ever.
Exactly, yeah, great flick.
And do you think a lot of your experiences, past experience, particularly defence, are the reason you really put a lot of emphasis on, that family life and how you take every moment rather than maybe just business oriented and just on that eternal grind?
Unquestionably, it was a great, I think, for a couple of reasons there. One being that I'm in the very fortunate position of having achieved most of what I wanted to achieve in my military career as a young bloke, when I was still physically able to, when the family was young, and I could still have that, like I said earlier, that selfish emphasis on pursuing my professional ambitions. And so I can now look back and think, you know, I didn't tick every box I wanted to tick in my career, but geez, I ticked a lot of them, and I really had a great run. And so that allows me a degree of been there, done that. Now I can move back and really try and reinvest in the family side of things and balance things out. You know, we talk about this work-life balance. I tend to try and think of that as not so much all at once, but a longitudinal thing, you know, and that was kind of always my understanding with my wife, was that we'd plow through this thing. There'd be some tough years where there was young kids and she was bearing the brunt of it all. But then when it reached the obvious point where I needed to stop doing what I was doing, and it was becoming a bit much from a family perspective, that I would get out, and with the balance would swing in the other direction a little bit. And so that's thankfully happened a little bit. But so that ability to look back and not regret not trying, and to look back with these fantastic memories of a what I considered to be a military career well spent in a time where there was a lot going on. You know, the stars really aligned, and I'm very thankful that happened, to have had those opportunities. But also having experienced the deaths of mates, you know, that I was on the scene for and couldn't save. And like I said, having seen the devastation to their family units, and even the ones who survived, you know, there's mates of mine who've got legs off and are quadriplegic, and, you know, all manner of horrendous injuries, and but for dumb luck that didn't happen to me, you know. So yeah, I think that's really put a bunch of perspective on my life and made me realise just how lucky we are. And then I guess the third factor also is having seen how most of the world lives, and then to think, geez, I'll come back to Australia where the standard of life is outstanding compared to the rest of the world. And not only that, I'm in this privileged position of being qualified to do a job that society says here, you know, you get paid well. And so it's just this overwhelming sort of luck that I've ended up, you know, born into a family where I had the opportunities. I had managed to do what I did when I did it. The Army paid for my education, that gave me a qualification that translated into the civilian world, and it's all kind of flowed on from there. Met a great woman who, God bless her, stuck with me through all that shit, and we got 3 happy, healthy kids. So I mean, I really appreciate the you know, the luck and good fortune that I have, and so, you know, I don't take that for granted, and I like to think I'd try and live that way. I'm still human, we all are, and you have your ups and downs, but for the most part, I'm sort of really grateful day in, day out, and I remind myself how lucky I am.
What was the moment where you decided, with the military particularly, okay, this is where I need to, you know, I guess close this chapter?
It wasn't one moment as such, and to be honest, I probably should have left a year or 18 months before I did. When I look back, I was burnt out, I was fried, and I was, with hindsight, struggling with not having processed some of the events that were going on, and I was starting to become really disgruntled with what I perceived as a lack of progress. You know, at SASR, for crying out loud, we're in one of the more progressive and the units where we really were empowered to move quickly. I didn't feel that the capability that I was a part of was being progressed as fast as I'd like. And I guess I was having a lot of exposure to the international community, seeing what they were doing, and then was getting a little frustrated that we weren't moving at the same pace. And I was also getting a little bit frustrated at my perception of the unit not embracing our capability and integrating our capability more than I thought they should. And at the time, it was quite real real to me, but looking back, I realised that I was the problem. It wasn't the unit at all. It was me. I was fried. I was jaded, sort of disgruntled, burnt out, resentful, and I was definitely the problem. But I mean, the real catalyst to discharge from the army was the birth of our third son, and so that little guy came along. I'd just gotten back from my fourth tour of Afghanistan, and within maybe 10 days of the little guy being born, and it was after that I'd always said to my wife when it became too much, let me know, let's talk about this, and it was after the little man was born that my wife said, hey, it's time, and it was well overdue. So that was and that was around the same time that I was starting to get a bit frustrated at work, and there was one situation. We were doing this counter-terrorist exercise up in the Torres Strait, and things hadn't gone the way that I had hoped they would in this scenario. There was, I won't go into the fine detail, but anyway, I ended up cooking off spectacularly in this after action review with a room full of people from all sorts of agencies and units, and commanding officers from here, there and everywhere, and government agents, and it was inappropriate. It was grossly inappropriate, and the executive officer of the unit at the time, a fantastic individual, managed to sort of settle me down and deconflict it, but I look back, and that was all around the same time, and it all was just telling me that it's time to get out of this and move on to something new. So yeah, it wasn't one event, it was this culmination of things, but as I said, it was probably a year overdue. I'd say I was probably a bit burnt out long before I left.
Yeah, I said a personal thing too, because I'm sort of like, oh shit, am I ready to leave?
Yeah, well, how do you know?
I know.
Yeah, and I think until you've overstayed your welcome, you don't know that you're ready to leave. And if you leave before you're well and truly ready, then you might always look back and think, oh, geez, maybe I should have stuck around a bit longer. So I don't know. There's ever a right time for any of these things. I think there's probably screamingly obvious times where you still have unfinished business that you could finish, and that's probably the wrong time. And then there's other times, and I think we've all seen these folk, where people have clearly overstayed when they should have by 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
They can often be quite toxic. They can be those toxic sort of jaded people that really can bring the enthusiasm in a group down. But yeah, I think anywhere in between that, and if you've got something to move on to and other fish to fry in other realms, I think you're making the right decision.
Because there's a big importance, I guess, on moving towards something, and even if, and I guess it's too, if you're in the military, and you're like, well, I've got this opportunity, or I can move towards this in the civil world. I guess it's very important to go with it, rather than, I guess, hanging in a limbo or in a holding pattern as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's some fantastic literature surrounding happiness and what that looks like for people. And there's a lot of great evidence to suggest that humans are happiest when we're striving towards something. It's kind of that grind towards particularly a lofty goal that makes you happy. And then when you reach that goal, oftentimes there's a great quote I came across just a few weeks ago talking about a mountain only looks like a mountain when you're climbing it. And so, you're there, you're looking at this goal, and it's still in the distance, you're working towards it, you're climbing that mountain, but then you'll get on top of it, and then you look around, it no longer looks like a mountain anymore, and there might be a peak over there. You think, geez, I wouldn't mind climbing that one. And so I think for me anyway, I find that I'm happiest when I have a highly ambitious life goal that I'm moving towards, and so that brings me great pleasure. And I guess coming back to SASR, that was what motivated me for a long time to get there, and then I got there and did the job for a while, and I can see with hindsight, after 5 years in special operations, doing fundamentally the same job and 4 trips overseas, doing once again, they were different jobs each time, but fundamentally the same thing, that it was kind of, I'd climbed that mountain, I was standing on top of it, and it was great for a couple of years. You've got this steep learning curve where you're acquiring the new skills, and then you're using those skills. But I can see now that there was probably 18 months there where I was starting to stagnate, and that was when it was time to move on to a new challenge. But in terms of the happiness, the literature suggests that it's not actually at goal attainment, it's working towards that goal, and the attainment of the goal really isn't the that isn't the thing that makes us happy. It's all the effort that's gone into it. That the attainment just validates all that effort.
Yeah. And what is that for you currently?
Oh, look, yeah, good question. I mean, I've currently got a project on the go. We've spoken about it, and you're in it. I'll run that by you before it goes to press. But so Ben, my brother, and Tim Curtis, who you know, of course, from the Unforgiving 60 podcast, the three of us have got a book deal to write a book on resilience. So we between us for years now have been doing presentations, workshops, and refining this resilience, this view of resilience. And it's nothing terribly novel, but it's just drawing together a lot of observations from our military careers. So, you know, as you know, they're both ex-SAS officers, and they're looking at our experiences, but it all came out of what we've spoken about before, which was particularly my experience transitioning out of the military and out of that environment, and then the wheels coming off it a little bit. And so there'd been this period of time of years where there'd been a fair amount of stress and a fair amount of trauma, but I felt seemingly unaffected by it all. And then all of a sudden I get out and I'm completely safe, and my pace of life slows down considerably, and I'm earning a lot more money as a civilian doctor. So there's a lot of these metrics that are far better. My stress should be coming down, and yet I found myself worse off. And so there was a lot of soul searching and reflection, and researching the literature was how I found for my mind to be able to process a lot of this, was looking at the psychological theories of underpinning, trauma, underpinning things like social identity theory, where you want to be part of groups. It's a human thing. Looking at things like Maslow's hierarchy and what motivates humans, and esteem needs, and what Maslow termed self-actualization. So being the best version of yourself, and slowly started to piece all this together to see that what was happening was within special operations, while there was a lot of stress and a lot of cumulative, trauma, if you like, there was also a whole stack of factors that were making me resilient. So, you know, it was the perfect environment to stay physically fit. You're training every day, a couple of hours a day. So you physically, you're fit, you're doing something meaningful. So, you know, you had purpose, a really strong purpose. My values were well aligned with the unit values. So there was this value congruence between who I was as a human and the unit's objectives. There was of course, a close-knit group of people around me. So I had that social support there. It's very professionally stimulated. As I said earlier, there was a lot of training invested into us. There was constantly a new goal to achieve a new skill set, at least for the first few years. And so there was a lot of that building up to bolster resilience. And so while, sure, there was a bunch of stress, there was a stack of resilience as well. And with hindsight, when I got out, I hadn't processed basically any of that trauma, I just sort of packed it away, and there was lots of distractions, which was a great coping strategy, a maladaptive coping strategy, but there was always a distraction, so you didn't really have to think about stuff, you just move on. And all of a sudden when it stopped and I got out, disconnected from that social support, moved away from that unit, that job where my values were aligned, lost that identity, which I'd invested so much in as being a doctor with one of those units. And everything started to catch up with me. And so we started to look at resilience and stress as being on two different sides of a scale, if you like, a set of scales. And so, you can build up stress, but if you build up resilience, the scales won't tip. And what I felt had happened to me is I'd gotten out, lost a bunch of resilience, the stress was still there, and I tipped in that direction, and then slowly had to build the resilience up, reduce the stress. And then that got us to thinking that if you can proactively build your resilience before something goes wrong, you can tip those scales in the other direction. So you've got a stack of resilience, you can do strategies, use conscious strategies to minimize the stress in your life, and then you'd be better off to, more well postured to endure stress when it occurs. And so this is a very long-winded answer to your question. Sorry.
No,
Willy,
it's good. I'm invested.
But basically, say Ben and I, so my brother and I, we kind of thrashed this out actually over breakfast. We were on our way to an Air Force officer cadet training base to do a presentation there on resilience. And this is about 18 months ago now, where this all kind of gelled, and we started to think of this, what we're terming the resilient shield, as being this layered structure, all these different components that are interwoven to create your overall resilience. And that's the premise of the book. So it's looking at resilience as a multifactorial dynamic construct, so it ebbs and flows, but most importantly, it's trainable. So you can proactively train your resilience to get ahead of the curve for when this complex world throws a curveball at us.
And what do you reckon the best way to build that resilience is? Not to make the sales of the book.
No, hey, you'll have to buy the book with it.
I guess there's for $39.99. But
Exactly right.
Yeah,
well, for another glass of whiskey, I'll tell you. But
do you want more? By the way,
I won't. Thanks, mate. That's a joke.
We better keep that. Well, there's water here too if you want. So
right, sounds good. Well, I mean, we break it down, and so the layers that we talk to, and this is all fallen out of our own observations, but more so the evidence base behind resilience. So what makes you resilient, and what makes people resilient? Where do people fall down if they have deficits in certain areas in their life and have stressful events? And so we've broken it down into different layers. So there's an innate component to resilience. We know this. There's genetics involved. There's what's called epigenetics. So it's the nature and nurture piece. So they know that there's certain genes that are positively correlated with resilience. And so, I mean, you get dealt a hand, and then, your upbringing goes into it. Whether you've had support during key phases of your upbringing, the stresses you've had throughout your life, whether you've overcome them or not. So all of this plays into your innate resilience, and whether you've risen to the occasion or you've not, whether you were looked after in critical developmental periods or not. So there's all of that's there as the base, if you like, and there's a degree that you can revisit previous events and reframe them in a positive nature, but for the most part, your innate resilience has been set in play unconsciously. You've developed it as you've gone along. The next layer that we look at is your mind, and so looking at strategies you might have to deal with stress. So basically things like spirituality, mindfulness, meditation, all of these kind of things that now the science is overwhelmingly supportive of the fact that you can actually change your neural pathways. So meditation, mindfulness practice, we know now you can rewire your brain. You can get better impulse control. You can dull down your amygdala response, so your fight or flight response, which drives all your stress hormones. So that mental stimulus that causes your body to go into a stress state, to dump more cortisol and adrenaline and those sort of things. You can strengthen those pathways, and so that's the mind layer is that in a nutshell. The body layer is the next one up, which talks to both health and fitness, as well as nutrition, sleep, these kind of things, gut microbiome to a degree as well. But just looking at your overall physical well-being, and exercise plays into that. But health and exercise, we've differentiated. You've got your baseline health, and then exercise on top of that. I think most people know has its own benefits, and that's a lot around reducing cortisol, reducing chronic stress, reducing chronic inflammation, getting your sleep right, strategies around sleep, and nutrition, as I said, gut microbiome, that kind of business. When you move up from there, we start looking at your social layer, and so we know that people who have strong social inner connection are more resilient, and it makes sense. It makes sense on a very logical level that if you've got good social support, you're going to be better postured to deal with stress. And so, but we really drill down into the science behind that, and then look at the strategies, looking at things like social identity theory, identity fusion, how you kind of group dynamics, how you form meaningful social relationships, look at this new age of online relationships and social media and that as a bit of a trap and a bit of a diversion from meaningful social relationships. But it has some utility, but it can be a real double-edged sword. So your social layers there. On top of that, you've got your professional layer, which just talks to your performance in your work domain and just how to optimize that, looking at strategies there to build resilience professionally, ideally in an environment where your values are aligned with the values of the organisation you work for. You hear these idealistic sort of roles where people feel like they don't work a day in their life because they love their job, and that's the gold standard. You've got your Simon Sinek type authors, and he's famous for that find your why type thing and pursuing your life's purpose. But we acknowledge that that's not always achievable, and then have a look at, well, how can you make the most of a situation if you are in a job that's really not your dream job? Then how can you engage meaningfully and purposefully in a role that isn't necessarily perfectly aligned with your values? And tapping into, there's a fantastic Hungarian American a social psychologist called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who talks about the flow state, and he's the one that coined that term, and just talking about how strategies you can use to bring flow into the workplace to improve your engagement at work, and then just other strategies about professional relationship management, the situations you might be in where you're under a boss who you may not see eye to eye with, and then always in the background there, if you're really stuck in that situation, drawing down a bit on the Stoic philosophies of Marcus Aurelius. Got a great quote talking about getting involved in your own rescue. So don't sit around and piss and moan and be the victim for 15 years of your life. Do something about it. Chip away at a different qualification. These kind of things. And so that's the theme of the professional layer. And then we talk about this adaptation, which is almost like a layer around that whole interwoven shield. And I mean, all these different layers are all interwoven. So I mean, you can't have your physical layer and your mind layer as completely separate, because your mind functions drive some of your physical functions and vice versa, and your social relationships will have a physical effect on your mind. And so I mean, it's all the whole concept is this thing is all interwoven, and that strengthens your resilience. And we use a vignette from, and you'll appreciate this one, of an Afghan rug. And you will have been to the markets and seen the Afghan rugs, and they were always so keen to show you the weave on the bottom of the rug and how tight the weave was, and that was the metric they used to indicate the quality of the rug, that tightness of the weave. And that's the analogy, not so much what it looks like on the top. The cosmetics of it was secondary. It was how tight the weave was drove the value. And we use that analogy with all these different layers of your resilience shield. You want that tightly woven, all the individual layers strong but interwoven and proportionate. You don't want to be all out of balance and too heavily invested in one area and not the other. And then this adaptation that surrounds it all just comes from a global resilience. If you build up all those different layers and they're all sort of healthy and tightly interwoven, then you get this global adaptation that allows you to be resilient to novel stressors. So, you might be very good at your job and very resilient to the professional stress of your job. You might be fit and very physically resilient, and your immune system might be good. But this is talking about, how do you deal with the curveballs? How do you deal when the complex world throws you a curveball you didn't see coming? And so our premise is that if you build all these layers, you'll be in an optimal state to deal with this thing you couldn't have predicted.
And I guess my question is, where do you start with that? Where, if someone's having a rough time at work, or like, it's, I guess it makes sense to everyone that, everything is interconnected, from your mind to your physical, your health, everything. But I guess a lot of people are like, yeah, back that, but where do I start with it? If I'm having a rough time at work, what would be my first steps into this? Is it identifying the issues and then what can I do to make them? Or
Yeah, look, of course, I mean, without identifying it, if you're insightless, then you can't really address anything. So, yeah, absolutely. And all of those chapters with the individual layers talk about strategies. And we talk a lot about this always a little further, which is quite a famous quote from, I think his name was James Elroy Flecker. I hope I'm not getting that wrong, but Flecker wrote The Golden Journey to Samarkand. And that's a quote from that. And it's as I understand it, inscribed on the clock tower at the 22 SAS regiment over in Hereford, the UK SAS. This always a little further is very famous with them, but it's a fantastic, I think, just little snapshot to remind you just small steps, continual improvement, and that's a recurring line throughout this whole book, just reminding you it's not these massive leaps that you need to make in any area. It's these small sustainable steps, always a little further. And in each of the chapters, we look at a whole stack of different ways that strategies you can use and what the evidence says works. And, looking at things like mindset, looking at different psychological techniques, meditation techniques, looking at the evidence surrounding physical fitness and, how many minutes a day are required for this benefit and this longevity, and looking at, we've really done a deep dive into the evidence and then tried to draw out of that these achievable, sustainable tactics and little tips that you can build into your day-to-day life to make these slow, sustainable changes. And so, yeah, I mean, it can seem overwhelming like anything, but it's all about taking that long view and just slowly but surely just steering the ship in the right direction and building up. And I think there was a lot of stuff that I found surprised me in terms of the literature supporting resilience and looking at the studies, and it's stuff when it's pointed out to you makes sense, but you wouldn't necessarily think about it, and things like, I mean, the social layer, for instance, and just investing and being a bit more present with your family and sitting down for dinner and turning your phone off and not doing not being on Instagram when you should be hanging out with your little kid. And it's these small, seemingly insignificant things that build those bonds and build those relationships over time. And it's those investing in relationships, having a chat with a bloke in your cycling squad or at your footy club or something like that. Just those kind of things is what builds up these meaningful relationships that you can then, if needs be, potentially rely upon in times of crisis. But it's all about, and that's using the social example, the physical example, trying to get your health and your exercise regime right so that your body's in an optimal state, trying to get your mind right and starting to look into this meditation piece and a bit of mindfulness piece and a bit of gratitude and that kind of stuff. And then over time, you have this, and I've noticed that myself, particularly with the meditation and the gratitude, it changes your worldview, and it sort of happens slowly, and it isn't about these exponential leaps that happen quickly. It's the slow sort of slow burn, always a little further type approach. But yeah, there's a stack in amongst this. We've got all these little breakout boxes that talk about, check out this or have a look at this or try this, and here's a technique and here's the evidence says this, give that a go. And so they're scattered throughout the book.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be,
cheers, mate.
It's going to be something I know you guys have put so much effort into, and I've probably delayed parts of it as well.
Not at all, mate. No. You've been great. No, we appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's been a great project. And look, I mean, like with the average 70 kilo thing, this has been fantastic to work with a proper publisher and to step through that process, which is a number of rungs up from the just write something, self-publish it, throw it out there. But it's been great. It's been a really engaging process, and it's, for me, it's been fantastic working with Ben and Tim and getting because it was really I guess really interesting for all of us to look at the same topic, and we all came at it from slightly different angles. And so we allocated chapters, and then we wrote them, and then had the others edit it. And what I realised was that with a lot of this stuff, I had a fairly fixed, rigid view of my interpretation of what this meant for resilience, and then I'd get the edits back from Ben or Tim, and they had a completely different view that I hadn't even thought of, and a lot of the time it's like, wow, that's brilliant, but I wouldn't have ever thought of it because I was so rigidly sort of fixed in my own interpretation of that. So it's been great to do it as a team effort.
Because I guess there's an amount of openness you need to walk into something like that too. Because if you are just rigid and this is the way, this is A and this is B, then it's not a waste of time, but you need to be open to different techniques and views of the world.
Yeah.
Because you see that with some people, you're like, you can't change unless you're actually willing to change.
Oh, for sure. And the other thing is to not let ego get in the way of the process. And that was something we've been very upfront and very open about. And because there's no question that if you spend hours and hours writing a couple of thousand words on something and then it goes to the editing process with the three of us and gets shut down unceremoniously, it's hard for your ego not to take that personally. But no, it's been good, and it's actually, it is fantastic to have that other set of two sets of eyes of people that I have a huge amount of respect for, to be able to take to my stuff and modify it, trim it, cull it, add to it, and enhance it has been great. It's been a good process. So yeah, hopefully it'll come together really well.
Yeah, bloody oath, of course it will. Well, I'm looking forward to it because I'm always hunting for resilient stuff, because I guess I'm pretty good at identifying stresses and what's going on, but then may shut things down more so than accept stuff. So and particularly with work too. Like I am one of those guys who just work myself to the bone. Like last week there was like 2 days I just didn't eat because I was working so much, normal work hours, and then working like a madman after hours. Because I almost feel like there's some, and I think my social following has done this to me, whether it's good or bad, but a need to be what I would claim successful after my career. Because I think people have seen me have, moderate success, both in defence and while I've been out, that I almost feel guilty if I were to leave defence and I just want to work at Bunnings and fucking do this. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's almost like a drive of, no, I need to continue doing this, and what's the next step? And I'm not a very content person with anything. It always needs to be the next thing. And it's sometimes I need to stop and look back and actually, no, I have done this amount, and not get it sort of flustered over it.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, and I think you and I are probably wired fairly similarly, and it takes all kinds, doesn't it? And I've got a lot of friends who, are seemingly very content with where they're at in life, and that's fantastic. And a big part of me looks at that and thinks, man, why can't I just be that dude? Like we'll, and I think I will never. Well, never say never, but I'm less likely to be that guy. It would take a massive adjustment of my mindset and my sort of internal drive to wind that back. And I've certainly gotten better at winding some of that back. I've let go of some of those ideals and those that accountability that I held myself to in the past. And I think a degree of that, as in a military role, there's certain things that you just have to maintain. You've got to maintain your fitness to whatever standard. You've got to maintain your, whatever else you're shooting, your other skill sets, because that's how it is. That's a job requisite. But a lot of that I kind of hung over for years when I got out of the military, and then sort of started to get a bit older, get a bit more injured, and old injuries came back to haunt me. And I found myself at one point a couple of years ago and just sort of thinking, what am I doing here? Like, why am I trying to deadlift 200 kilos as a 70 kilo bloke? It doesn't make any sense. I'm in my 40s, and I, it's probably been a good thing we talk about bad things being good things ultimately, but I popped a disc out of my spine and it started to push on, the textbook sciatica, the ruptured a disc, and it was crumping a nerve root going down my leg, and it's getting a lot of pain, and eventually got some physio that didn't help, got some scans and found this busted disc, and which made sense. And to be honest, I was actually really thankful that that's what it was, because my mind had run away from me a little bit. I had this unexplained pain and whatever else, and the list of, I guess, being a doctor acted against me here. I knew the list of diagnoses that could cause such pain. So I'll take a ruptured spinal disc anytime. But what that really made me do was just reevaluate these physical goals that didn't make any sense. They weren't really aligned with anything other than picking up 200 kilos. I mean, I don't need to do that. It's counterproductive at this age, and so it allowed me to, out of necessity, to avoid surgery. The surgeon said, "Hey, look, we don't need to cut this thing right now. You can give rehab a go and go do a bunch of yoga." And so I did, and so I got into that yoga space, which I absolutely love, and some much needed flexibility that I've been lacking for the first 42 years of my life, and so but also that mindfulness and breathing and everything that I've really been getting into over the last few years. Yoga is a great complementary activity to that. It's been fantastic for my spine. I'm pain free for the time being, thankfully, and I've gotten back into some light lifting. But I think that mindset and that constantly needing to push yourself and evolve, and I think it's healthy, but by that same token, you need to learn at some point in your life to back that off, and I'm finding that now, and I'm finding that, particularly I mentioned before, from trying to balance that my family life with my work life with my training, and so certain things I've had to turn the volume down a little bit on, other things I've turned the volume up, and so it's all for me going along really well at the moment.
Well, it's bloody good to hear, but one of the other things I guess following you on social media is how we first became friends, and then through just chatting shit, but is the, I guess, volume you seem to and do fit in everyday life. And I've brought you up as an example to so many people. And there's other operators, particularly, some guys from the SASR that, mutual friends, where it seems the volume is massive. I see a lot of people work 9 to 5 with kids, and already that work-life balance is already, it seems to be tipped way in the scale of work. How do you have any skills, I guess, going about maintaining a work-life balance, but then I guess efficiency of work? Because it's something I'm not good at, and I think I'm learning, going down, I guess, the path of, I guess, not working for myself, but I have a lot of projects on, as well as full-time work, and as well as maintaining a relationship with Lily and with my friends. That the first thing that gets cut away is personal relations, and then it's and my own stuff, and then whatever. And I struggle to, I guess, find the time in the day without sacrifice. That I look at some people in awe, and I'm like, well, Dan's working full time. He's writing stuff. He's got other projects in the works, and all this other shit. And I know there's compromise somewhere because there's 24 hours in a day. But I guess what you've learnt to fit more into the allocated time you've got.
Yeah, look, thank you for saying that. And I guess social media is great in that you can just force feed these 1 minute snapshots of your life. And so, it's not, I'm not one of those super productive, bloody Gary Vaynerchuk types that seems to squeeze 30 hours out of every 24-hour period. But I think something that I have done well over the years is just been consistent and persistent, and just always had goals and always had time frames to work towards, and a lot of them have been imposed by deadlines. Like, this book project's a good one. We've got a deadline to have the first draft in, and then thankfully I'm working with 2 ex-SAS senior officers who Tim did up a sync matrix for us to work towards, and so it's been fantastic. Left to my own devices, I would.
I still don't know how to use Zoom though. I had to sort them out on that.
Hey, yeah, I've
I
had
still
to
laugh
work
at that.
that
So
out, yeah.
you rely on an infantry NCO to sort out your fucking Zoom.
So there's been a lot of it's been externally imposed by setting goals and committing to things, to committing to study or whatever, and then you're on the treadmill. You got to keep running, otherwise you fall off it. So you just get stuff done, and I've always had an ability, which I suspect my dad instilled in me with hindsight, to just keep trying to improve myself and keep moving forward, and so keep trying to get higher qualifications and to keep trying to have fun side projects, keep trying to keep myself fit and whatever else. But from a business side of things, I'm very lucky to be engaged in things like TACMED Australia and the Coffee Cannon project and the car project, where I've got other people involved. Either in TACMED I've got the majority owners that hold me accountable. So I mean, there's accountability, there's a business cycle that spins there in terms of your various meetings and objectives and whatever else, and then with the Coffee Cannon, I've got a business partner there, and so we can hold each other accountable, and once again you set these deadlines where you got to have stuff done. And so I think that, and once again we talk about this in the book in terms of efficiency and in terms of the setting timelines and doing deep work when you need to do deep work, and that productivity and cutting away a lot of procrastination and wasted time and distraction, just having a work environment where you're very focused. And I have, over the last few years, become very, very interested in sleep optimization, and to the point where I now every night wear blue light blocking glasses, and I don't look at any blue light for hours before bed. I do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. Wear a sleep tracker. I wear a lot of the time a constant glucose monitor, a blood glucose thing, like a little diabetic doodad that allows me with an app to measure my blood glucose, and I spend a lot of time in a ketotic diet. And so for years I've been tinkering with all of these sort of things to see how it impacts on my sleep and various other parameters, and I've found that I can optimize my sleep to the point where I'm getting far better quality sleep, and so for me personally, I'm able to trim down that sleep time to 6.5 hours, but get nearly 2 hours of REM sleep and an hour of deep sleep. So I wake up feeling good. It means I can get up early, I can get a couple of hours stuff done, and if you can get a couple of hours of focused work done, for me in the morning before anyone else is up, because once the human wrecking balls wake up, there's no chance of getting anything done. So that's a couple of hours where I can do my thing, and that adds up. It's like that, always a little further. You do that 5 times a week, and there's 10 hours that you can squeeze out of nowhere. And so and then a couple of hours at the end of the day here and there, or I'll spend that time. Lately I've been logging a lot of time watching Shameless. I don't know if you've come across that, but
a little bit.
My wife got me onto that, and so I've donated a fair chunk of my life to that. But we just finished that up last night, so I can get my evenings back now. But I think it's about those efficiency hacks. That sort of I love that whole biohacking community, and a lot of these ideas have come from listening to biohacking audiobooks and reading books and just toying with all of these things to optimize my sleep, and that means I can squeeze a couple of extra hours out each day, and then those focus techniques to make sure that I get up in the morning, I know exactly what I'm doing, I've got zero distractions, I don't look at my phone, I open my computer and it's right on what I want to do, and I sit there and knock out hour or two in the morning. And so it's those sort of things.
Yeah, and that's something I'm interested in, especially sleep, because I've my whole life I've been a fucking terrible sleeper.
Yeah.
And I know Lily particularly only, 3 months ago, said you've never slept like this since you were diagnosed. Lily knew me 3 months until I was diagnosed, I guess. And then, and she said, she's like, I haven't heard you sleep like that in 2.5 years. And I was like, holy fuck, that's probably 2.5 years I've been sleeping shit. That is so much time.
Yeah.
And I guess something like that is particularly once I'm out of the Defence Force, and I get a lot more free time. That's where I'll be looking at really, and I'm probably going to hit you up like a million times about, hey, what are some goals with this? Yeah. Because, I need to be more efficient with my time. And that procrastination, and I guess feeling shit, makes you procrastinate.
Yeah.
You don't get stuff done. There's an interesting bit where Jordan Peterson, as a psychologist,
Yes.
a clinical psych, was talking about, I guess, how much are you actually getting done? Like, you go to the library to study and you do this, you procrastinate for however long, then you talk to your friends. You may go for 3 hours and actually only get 15 minutes actually done.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of his, whether you love him or hate him, is a really good when he's talking about how much you're worth. He goes, okay, let's say your time is actually worth $50 an hour. And that's, minimum. It depends. You might be worth $100 an hour. But if you say 50, if you can sleep better and in, say, your case, get 2 hours of work done a day before your kids arrive, that's probably 2 hours more than some people get in an 8-hour work day at work, between driving and coffees and talking to people and bullshit meetings, whatever. And then if, that time extrapolates into $50 an hour and then into 7 days a week or 5 days a week, this turns into, let alone money figures, but efficiency figures of what you actually get done.
Yeah.
Because I know I've had days at work where I've been busy as and got nothing done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the best time I've ever had of, I guess, when I started getting my life in order a bit, between, I guess, order and chaos, was during COVID isolation. I went to isolation for about 9 weeks. And I felt like I got so much on track.
Yep.
My sleep was on track. My diet was on track. And I was writing, I'd limited myself to 1,000 words a day of writing.
Yep.
I felt, because I'm putting together, I guess, a book.
Yeah, yeah.
And it wouldn't matter if it was an hour, because sometimes to get 1,000 words out would take me 2 hours, because I just wouldn't get it right. I'd be like, oh, fuck, that's the story. No, that's not the story. This happened.
Yeah.
Or it would take 15 minutes. It would just be in the zone and get it. But I set a limit on it because I didn't want to burn out, right? 5,000 the next day, get nothing. And I felt like I got in such a good rhythm with it. And I was like, oh, shit. And it actually gave me some confidence of after defense. I'm like, well, actually, I will be driven to, because I've got no reason to get up. But oh, shit, I've developed a reason.
Yep.
But yeah, that biohacking is something that really intrigues me.
Yeah, and I think writing is a great example. And there's some, I can't remember the name of the book that I was reading, but it was talking about the writing process. It was a book about writing books, like a dream within a dream. But and it was talking about it was using the analogy of going to the gym and just putting in the reps, basically, and just setting yourself up to habitually write in the same place at the same time of day. And humans are creatures of habit, and if you can establish a habit but acknowledge, just like the gym, you're going to turn up some days and it's just going to be tough. It's going to be a slog. You're not going to get anything done. Everything you write's crap. You're going to stare at the cursor for hours, and then you'll have other days where it just flows out of you, and you the time passes quickly. You hit that flow state, and you really engage and get lost in the creative process. But it's that consistency and that making sure that you are turning up and logging the hours, and that's the stuff that and it's not sexy, it's not shiny, but it is the stuff that adds up over time, and that's I've spoken about this a lot in a lot of different forums, but that's when I look back, the only thing that I can see that might have differentiated me from someone else who may have not have achieved their life goals is just that I just kept slugging away at them. It's been nothing spectacular. It's just keep on trying and keep on edging towards this thing, and for whatever reason I'm wired in a manner that allows me to do that, and I'm quite happy to have these ambitious goals that may not eventuate, and if they do, it won't be for years down the track, and that's okay with me. I'm comfortable as long as I feel I'm moving towards something that's good for me. It makes me happy.
And how do you go about, that bit of pressure, I guess, of thinking, well, this may not eventuate. What do I do if this all falls over on me? How do you, I guess, of course, that's failing from the beginning. But, you're logical about, oh, shit, this may not work.
Yeah.
How do you go about that?
Oh, mate, I'm pretty comfortable with failure, you know, and I don't know if that comes just from being a bit older and from having done a few things that did succeed and being, happy with that. And I think if everything I'd attempted as I'd gone along had failed miserably, but there's plenty of stuff that I have failed at. I was, I'm sure we've spoken about it before, but my life ambition for the longest time when I was a teenager and into my early 20s was to be a professional triathlete, and I failed miserably at it. So, I mean, you know, that was the failure that I now look back on that kind of forced me to look at, well, what am I going to do? Join the army, you know, tried to get into medicine, got a spot there, and that led to this. So, and people often talk about these failures when you look back. At the time, you're devastated, and I was devastated. That was my life goal for 5-6 years, and to realise it wasn't going to happen was devastating. But when I look back now, 20 years later, I realise that if I had have been a bit better at triathlon, I wouldn't have had this opportunity to go do medicine, to be a doc, to go do what I've done there. So, you know, the universe has got a plan. I'm a strong believer in that, but as I've gone along, I've certainly failed at other things. I started a master of police intelligence and counter-terrorism at one point, and for whatever reason I just sucked at it. Like, I just struggled through. I eventually dropped out of that. I didn't fail out as such, but I wasn't spectacular at it all, you know, and that was a bit disillusioning at the time. I thought at that point I was still with the military, and I thought I might want to move into the intelligence community when I got out. But so, you know, you can look at that and think, well, that was a year of my life where I was up till bloody midnight, 3 nights a week, thrashing away at this stuff that I really was not very good at, to just scrape by and then bomb out, having spent, you know, however many tens of grand on. But with hindsight, it allowed me to realise, no, that isn't the direction I wanted to head. It gave me a set of skills to do online study in at a postgraduate level that then set me up well to do a Master of Business Administration, which I did love and I engaged in and could do well at, that then has allowed me to pursue business pursuits with a bit more of a intellectual approach to them. So, you know, it's all from coming back to your question, I'm very receptive to the idea that I might fail miserably at any of these pursuits, and that's cool. You know what, I just want to try and give things that excite me and stimulate me and make me that I feel are worthy pursuits and ambitions. I want to give them a go, and ultimately, if they fail, it's not really. I guess people. It is the ego once again that gets challenged, and it's if you allow someone else's opinion of you, like it's not me that's going to fail. It's the venture that fails, and I think that's the best way to look at it. And I'm very receptive to the idea that any of these things that I'm trying to achieve are going to fail. Ben, Tim, and I have had a good laugh about this book that we've put so much effort and so many hours into, just failing miserably, just being a flop and ending up in the bargain bin within a week. And you know, in the fullness of time, that will be hilarious should that be the case. Of course, we hope it's not.
Nah, of course not.
But you know, it's all possible. But I think you can. It's only a problem if you allow it to be, or if you have gambled so much of your I guess your assets or whatever else that will put you in a financially tough position. And you know, I'm not ever doing that. This is, if all of this fails, I can walk away from it and go back to my day job, and that's quite fine.
Yeah, that's something that actually struck chord with me when you said, you know, about it's not you that fails, it's the venture. Yeah. Because I guess that puts a bit of, I guess, emphasis and I guess a bit of comfort in my mind about what I'm looking to do after the defence. Because I'm looking to travel and somehow monetize travelling. And that's what I want to do for a bit. And it's like, well, yeah, it's not me that'll fail. It might just be the venture. Yeah. But when do you sort of see, when is, I guess, some indicators of when is it time to give it up? Yeah. Like with your masters of, what was it?
Policing intelligence, counterterrorism. Yeah.
When was it that you thought, okay, time to give this away? Because I guess both you and me and a lot of people like us have these mindsets of, I'll just fucking grind it out. It doesn't matter what happens. Yeah. I'm not willing to give it up. Yeah. And that never give up attitude. But when, you know, because of course there's a good time to give things up. When do you go, okay, this isn't working? Give it up and we'll do this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Now, I don't know that there's an easy answer. I pulled the pin on those studies after about 12 months. And in that period of time, so I didn't quit after the first term, although I sort of looked at it and I thought, geez, what am I doing here? You know, but in that 12-month period, I had the opportunity to get a better insight into the intelligence agencies that I thought I might like to join, and I was able to touch base with people working for those organisations and get a really good feel of what that might look like. Look at things like the pay scales and what that was all about, and the training pipeline, the potential job opportunities, and so there was a bunch going on in the background while I was studying. There was a bunch of seeking out information to see if I felt I was aligned with that line of work and if that was going to be a good way to go, and so that and a lot of that coming back to me was actually reinforcing that no, this isn't actually what I want to do. And so over a period of months throughout that year where I was studying, I was starting to realize, hey, hang on, this isn't where I want to go. And I hear what you're saying, and I think we get all these motivational bloody memes on the internet saying never ever quit and just grind it out and just keep going and all that, and I think to some degree that's great, unless it becomes clear that you're not headed in the direction you want to, and your investment in whatever you're pursuing is coming at the expense of pursuing something else more meaningful. So I think the idea of quitting something just to sit on the couch and watch Shameless, although Shameless is a bloody great series, but I think to watch Netflix or not do anything that's moving you towards a higher goal, for me anyway. Like I'm not sort of saying that this is for everyone, but for me, I think giving something a really good honest go, and then if it's very clear that it's not the direction I want to head, then I find that acceptable to cut it away. And as long as that is to change direction and invest that same energy into something that will move me in the direction that I think I want to head. And that changes as I go along. For all of us, it changes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's a hard one because I've heard so many people be like, yeah, I was about to give up, and then 2 weeks later, I made it.
Yeah.
Fuck. And I guess that's always a continuing thing of, oh shit, what if I am a week away? What if I'm a month away?
Yeah. And that's there's some great psychology there. There's this anticipated regret is a strong motivator for humans. This idea that we will regret a decision if we make it now, we'll regret it in the future, and that's something that's pretty unique to humans. I don't think a cat has any anticipated regret, But you're right with that. What if I just hold on for a little longer and it might just tick over? So it is hopelessly tough. I mean, this car project that I've had on the go for many years now, and I'm so emotionally invested in that to an unhealthy degree. I really am, and this is my wife. This is a real issue of contention, and she just rolls her eyes whenever it comes up. But rationally, I should have walked away from that, years ago and many, many thousands of dollars ago, but I haven't, and I acknowledge that. And in my mind, I would be pleasantly surprised if it comes off financially, and I'm not expecting it to, but it's something that brings me a great deal of pleasure, and it's a great ambitious goal, and it's been a long-term goal, and so it's one that I want to drive to fruition, even though it makes no sense. And if you were looking at it with a fresh set of eyes and no emotional attachment, everyone who looks at it through that lens says, "What are you doing? Cut this away." But it's like I said, brings me a great deal of pleasure, and to the thought of pursuing it, even acknowledging that it's likely it will fail. It's likely I'll never develop this thing to a point where it'll be roadworthy. They're all actually likely, not even just probable. But I'm keen to give it a go and not die wondering.
Yeah. And how is the car going? I think everyone who's ever read your book or follows your Instagram or knows any stories is just like, has you got the fucking Lamborghini running yet? Or
no, well, yes. I mean, that's a different car project. So
is this the...
So talking about there's the project car, so the kind of lofty ambition to build a prototype car. But the Lambo is so it's I resprayed it, and so I
You didn't fuck it this time?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. I can proudly say it's not like a panel beater would not admit to the job that I've done to it. But for me, it's the best job I was capable of. So yeah, it looks presentable. But as I was reassembling the bloody thing, I was putting the final door back on, and I was putting all the door skins back in and everything else, and this door slipped off the workbench and gouged a couple of chunks out of it.
No.
And so I actually at the time I wasn't even mad. I just packed it away, put the cover on it, walked away, and came back to it a couple of months later. And I've actually accepted defeat and taken that door to a panel beater to do properly, and so the panel beater will finish that up, and I'll get it back together and back on the road.
Yeah. That's a journey, that car.
Yeah, no, that's been another thing that's brought me an incredible amount of pleasure. I've had that for about 11, 12 years now, and so yeah, it's something. I'd wanted a Lamborghini since I was a tiny kid, and that was the realization of that life dream, if you like.
Yeah,
and so yeah, I've held on to that. It's brought me a lot of joy, and as to whether I'll hold on to it long term or get rid of it, I'm not sure. But yeah, for the time being, I'll get it back together, get it back on the road.
Yeah, well, it may end up, a little bit like we were talking before about that mountain pinnacle, that once it's together and running, and you might be like, oh, well, the journey with it was it.
Yeah.
That was the ownership of it.
Yep.
It's a really interesting thing. And you mentioned before, you're still eating a ketosis diet or keto diet?
Yeah, look, for the most part, I've been
ketogenic
cycling. Yeah, ketogenic. Yeah, I've been cycling on and off it. So it's the latest literature that I've been tracking talks about that it's not healthy to be on it long term. And there was some interesting stuff. I can't recall the reference off the top of my head, but it was talking about myelination and hardwiring neural networks and skill acquisition, and talking about the being in ketosis, they know is very neuroprotective. It's good for your brain, and it's healthy and cleansing. And there's some fascinating stuff that they've known for, the ancient Egyptians apparently worked out that if you starved someone with epilepsy, they'd stop having as many seizures or stop having seizures. And I think at the time they probably thought that was something to do with the spirits, and you were starving the spirits. I'm not sure exactly how they interpreted that, but that's still something that in modern day medicine for refractory epilepsy, particularly in kids, they know that a ketotic diet will improve their epileptic control, and there's some great stuff looking at neurodegenerative disorders and slowing down neurodegenerative disorders with ketone bodies, and so there's a bunch of great stuff there. But there's also some interesting stuff talking about that you can get those benefits, but then there's also a benefit to be had from going back into a high carbohydrate diet and getting that refeeding and that the benefits from that as well. So I've sort of been cycling. I do tend to stick to my intermittent fasting, so that's something that I do routinely, so at least 16 hours a day, sometimes a bit more than that. Is something that agrees with me. So I'll just eat for 6-8 hours a day from midday or 2 p.m. through till about 8 p.m. is normally my kind of feeding window, if you like, and then just fast around that. I find that works for me, and then I'll cycle in and out of just sticking to a really low carbohydrate diet and going into periods of ketosis for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks here and there, and then having periods off it. And so it is something that I've made a part of my lifestyle because I really feel good on it, and I feel more productive, and my sleep improves, and I just feel overall more energized.
Yeah, well, that's something I guess I've picked up from yourself as well. Was when I had a bit of time, I guess downtime during COVID isolation. I'm like, right. And it was funny enough, it lined up with like when fucking Joe Rogan was doing it. Another inspiration of mine. Yeah. Was I actually jumped on for a month, full month carnivore diet. Meat only, meat and eggs.
Yep.
And honestly, like it's hard to do, especially if you're working like from home, it'd be easy. But the best I'd ever felt, I reckon, in my life, particularly because I've struggled since chemo, I guess, was carnivore. Well, I guess is keto next level.
I mean, that is keto. That's fundamentally ketogenic.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a high protein, low,
Yeah.
well, no carb.
There's no
pretty much,
carbs, no sugar. But I guess one of the best things, I guess, that rewiring of my brain after at least the first couple of weeks was not eating for enjoyment. Because after a while, you don't enjoy meat. You're
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
But eating became a source of nutrition
Yep.
to get food in, not an enjoyment. And I think
Yep.
mainly this is probably why a lot of people lose a lot of weight on the diet too, is me and Lily, we both did it. And it wasn't like, I will sit down for a meal and make an experience of the meal because there's tastes and this and that. It was snack on this and move on. What are you doing?
Yep.
What's next?
Yep.
Rather than the whole experience of food. And it was a weird thing because we base so much in our life around we have breakfast at work and then lunch, we have our lunch break and what we do, and then dinner, and no one can ever deny the facts of having dinner with your family at a table and everything.
Yeah.
But dinner out and doing this and having a drink with dinner and everything, it made it a true like feeding time and then move on. And since then I've been, I did between then probably I wouldn't even know, maybe 9 weeks keto. So under, say, 20 grams of carbs a day, or trying to.
Yep.
And then recently back on carnivore, going in and out.
Yep.
And I actually feel even better on carnivore than keto. It's a weird one, but I feel like a bit of a fucking savage just eating meat all day.
Yeah. And you're spot on. I think it's good for people to experiment with. And this is another thing that I am convinced is a factor on selection courses, that people will inevitably get driven into a ketogenic state on selection. I mean, it's a factor on almost every selection course that I'm aware of, that you will get food deprived at some point and you'll physically exert yourself. So you're going to burn through all your glycogen stores and you're going to force your body to burn fats. You're going to go into ketosis. And if you're doing that for the first time on a selection course, I mean, you will have experienced, I'm sure, that what they call keto flu, that when your body runs out of carbohydrate and you feel terrible on it. And but if you do it, if you cycle on and off it for long enough and give your body periods in ketosis, you become what they term metabolically flexible. So your body just clicks between glucose and ketone bodies or fats as your food source, and you don't, as your fuel source, and you don't notice the difference. And indeed, I can notice now, just having worn one of these blood glucose monitors around for enough time and, constantly tracking what my blood sugar is doing 24 hours a day for weeks at a time and checking my ketones, I now can know how I'm feeling as to what my blood sugar is doing, what my ketones are doing, and I feel better now when I go ketotic and when my blood sugar's down in the 3s, which is, if you were a diabetic, that's panic stations, feeling full of glucose type thing. But I actually feel really good running on these low blood sugars and the high ketones. But if you're not used to that and then you're on selection, you've got all the sleep deprivation, all the other horrible stuff that's happening to you on a selection course, and then you go into ketosis and get that keto flu superimposed on it. I think that's yet another factor that makes you feel ghastly and probably leads to people quitting. And that's another thing that I talk to any candidate that I have the opportunity to have a chat to, is give this thing a go. Like, train in a state of starvation, get out and feel how horrible that feels, and if you've got plenty of time leading up to your course, spend some time in ketosis and in and out, and get your body metabolically flexible so that it's not as big a hit when it happens on the course. But yeah, I think it's fantastic. And another point that you spoke of is that this habitual eating, that we get out of bed and you make breakfast and you fill yourself full of carbs when you're probably not even necessarily hungry, and then these intermittent kind of eating habits that we have, and you buy yourself back a whole stack of time by fasting. So I mean, if I skip breakfast, there's another 30 minutes in my morning that well, maybe not 30 minutes, but there's time there. I have a cold shower every morning, so there's another 10 minutes that I ain't hanging around under cold water, particularly in winter. So all these sort of things that I've fallen into the habit of doing for other reasons, buy you back time that you can be using productively elsewhere.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, because I know the second time I guess I went into ketosis, because I had like 2 weeks off, I did 8 normally. I didn't struggle at all.
No.
I went straight back carnivore, so zero carbs, zero sugar.
Yep.
It's meat and salt. And I felt fine. I know for like day, when I first did it, maybe day 2 to 4 or 5, I felt shit house.
Yep.
But yeah, second time around, no issues.
Yeah.
It was a weird
It's incredible,
thing
isn't it?
to build the flexibility. Well, you think you wouldn't live on it. You're like, it sort of goes against a lot of, I guess, what you're taught about eating or whatever. You're like, this is completely unhealthy.
Yeah.
You will feel like shit.
Yeah.
And you won't be able to maintain any sort of like workouts or physicality, but you can.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And the human unit's an incredible beast, isn't it? How you can, and you've got processes in your body that can take protein and turn it into, other bits and pieces. You can take fat and turn it into other bits. So like you can mold all that internally to meet all those requirements. And I can't remember if it was you and I talking. I've certainly heard it in a number of books, and I can't remember who the bloke was, but who went to live with the Eskimo and just lived on a diet of which was just pure meat. So I mean, they just killing seals and whatever else and eating fish and this was one of these historical figures who kind of pioneered this ketogenic diet, and I hope I'm not butchering that story too much, but I mean that's the premise of it. It was a person with a scientific mind who went to live with one of these communities and just lived on this diet and felt great and kind of brought that back well in advance of the current keto movement. This is decades ago, but you do have these populations, and there's that whole plant-based movement as well, which I've given that a go, and to be honest, it wasn't for me. Like I didn't. I suppose I didn't give it a really good nudge, but I've tried vegan and I've tried plant-based and these other bits and pieces, and for me the keto seems to be what agrees with me most at this point.
Yeah, no, it's something that's well worth giving a go. And you mentioned cold showers, and I know you're right into your ice baths as well.
Love it.
What do you find out of that's the benefit? Because I know a little bit of the benefits of it, and I think I've spoken to you about this before. I was frightened out of it when I was in Scandinavia doing
doing the saunas and the snow type routine.
I honestly thought I was going to fucking die into the salt water hole in it, like. And I talked that I came out of the Middle East to it, basically, from Adelaide 46, from Afghan back Adelaide to there.
Yep.
With, Afghanitude, as I'll call it. Like, I was fucking 10 foot tall and bulletproof.
Yeah.
And as soon as I went into this hole in the ice, I honestly thought I was going to die. And I sort of had this new respect of, like, the Titanic, thinking, you see these people on, like, the movie? Nah. You aren't talking to each other like that. Like, as soon as I went in, there's a guy there in a dry suit with like a stick in case something happens, and my hands didn't work like instantly. And I wasn't used to it. I hadn't adapted, and I, instead of lowering it, I jumped in. Which probably, I was 21 at the time, but if you're much older, there's probably a whole bunch of cardiac, things you probably want to watch out for. But like my fingers didn't even work to climb the ladder. I'm just hooking up onto the snow to dry off. But what do you find in that? Because I had a question, because I inboxed one of my mates, Ryan. Not sure if you've met Ryan. Anyway, he asked about, I guess, the hormones and how that could change with the ice baths and why it's sort of a big thing for it.
There's a bunch of science behind it, and there's, like any of these things, there's people who are against it and people who are for it, and there's the whole Wim Hof movement that just swears by this cold immersion and cold water immersion, and the part of the Wim Hof things, the breathing techniques as well, which I also think there's a lot of merit there. But I mean, the principle behind any of this stuff, any of the breathing stuff where you're doing breath holds and you're driving your carbon dioxide up and your oxygen down, or anything like the cold water immersion, it's just about the concept is called hormesis, and it's pushing your body just out of its preferred reference ranges. So your body operates within a whole bunch of fairly rigid parameters in terms of your blood blood acidity, your blood oxygen level, carbon dioxide level, the concentration of different salts in your blood, and temperature is of course one of these things. If you want to be at a fairly set level, roughly around 37 degrees Celsius, and if you push that too high, we all know from an army perspective, the heat illness, heat stroke is a very real thing that unfortunately has claimed the life of soldiers in the past, particularly in the north. And then on the other side, you've got your hypothermia where you go too high, and then you've got your hypothermia where you dip it a bit low. And this whole concept of these controlled stresses to your system to push yourself slightly outside of those reference ranges, if you do it in a graduated and controlled and sensible fashion, you can get a positive response. And so it's like any stress. Is like you go to the gym and you lift weights, and that's a stress on a microscopic level. You're tearing muscle fibers, and then your body, if you have the right nutrition and rest and recovery, will come back and it will strengthen those fibers and develop them, and that's how you build muscle. And then you lift more weight, and so your body adapts positively to the right amount of stress. And so the cold water immersion from a physiological perspective is a stressor. So it causes a stress response in your system. And there's a range of things, and there's a whole bunch of evidence, and then there's contrary evidence. And so, I mean, you're not going to get all the scientists to agree that this is good for you. There's a lot of sort of contrary opinions that this isn't a clever thing to do, and so I mean I'm not trying to suggest that anyone listening goes and gives it a lash, but once again, for me, the ice baths I've found have been fantastic for particularly inflammation, particularly when I was struggling a bit with that back injury. I found it was great for reducing inflammation. It stimulates an immune response as well, and so there's a lot of protective and cardiovascular response. It has an effect on your blood vessels and your cardiovascular system. There's all of this science behind it, but the bigger thing for me, to be honest, is the psychological resilience, and that I enjoy, particularly in the winter months, starting the day with a cold shower, and I think it might be is it Tim Ferriss? I think he's a big fan of the cold shower. There's a couple of really big names in the motivational type world that are advocates of this, and for that very reason, as much as anything else, just to do something difficult that your body's screaming at you not to do at the start of every day, I think that appeals to me in some sick fashion. If you set yourself up with that for the day, then it's a good start. And that I find that cold blast in the morning, particularly in winter, when it's proper. Well, we're in Adelaide, it's never proper cold compared to North America or something like that. But it's cold enough to give you that jolt, and you get that quick dump of stress response hormones, and that just gives you a bit of a pick me up, like another cup of coffee sort of thing.
Yeah, it's something I played with a little bit, but then I was just like, fuck this. There's something that you need to really, I guess, get into the habit of. And habits like that are very important. I had a psych on this. She was a performance psychologist, who actually I was in her book as well. And she talks about developing habits. She mainly works with athletes. But she, one of her main ones was, she was like, I never floss my teeth. She's like, every time you go to the dentist, they're like, start flossing. And 95% of people are like, yeah, like 2 days and stop. And her whole thing is about how to develop something into a habit and create habits with it. And it's something I think if I got into it, then I'd keep doing. Same with changing diets and whatever. But I know that overcoming something in the morning is so beneficial for the rest of your day. I think PT in the morning, at being in the army, PT every morning. I remember my whole goal, and I was never the fittest guy. Definitely not now, but back in the day, I was moderate. I was there. Particularly when I got back from the Middle East, I would have been upper, and that was when I was heavily training for selection. But it was always at PT. My goal was I didn't care where I was, but I wanted to push to the point where I think I can't keep doing this, or I can't push any harder. Push through, and then it's like, well, no matter what happens for the rest of the day, I've already overcome something. And I remember actually thinking back when I was a young digger, I would have been like 19 or 20, being like, it's somewhat a fantastic thing in the army that you have every morning something that you don't think you can complete, and then you complete the task. And some people never get that in their day.
Yeah.
They might not have that a week.
In their life.
In their life,
Yeah.
where you actually, I don't think I can do this, and then keep going.
Yep. I had a fantastic experience just a week or maybe 2 weeks ago. My eldest, who has just turned 13, has started taking an interest in doing some weights. And so it's this brilliant thing for me where I've got one of my young fellas in the shed with me, lifting weights, and he was doing some bench press, and so he's just getting started on some appropriate weights, and he was pushing on what was 30 kilos. So I mean, he had an Olympic bar with 210s, and I'm trying to think what he weighs. It's probably not much more than 30 kilos, but it was a good weight for him. We've been at it for a little while, and he'd stepped up to this 30 kilos, and he's done his 10 reps, and he's expecting me to take the bar from him, and I said to him, no, let's keep going. He's like, Dad, I can't. I'm like, you actually can, man. Like, just trust me, do it. I'm right here. I'll grab it if needs be. Pushes out another one, all him. And I'm like, man, keep going. He's like, oh, I don't think I can. I say, yeah, you can do it, And so he pushes out another two, and then he was spent. I grabbed the bar off him, and he's huffing and puffing. But it was just a fantastic moment for him to see that he's done these 10 reps, and he's like, I'm done. That's it. And I'm like, no, you're not. And then I kind of had that chat to him afterwards. I said, well, you did a whole 30% more after your body was trying to tell you it was done. And it was just great to see that resonate with him, and just, like you said, have that expansion in his mind of, you know what, I can probably start pushing things a little bit further than I thought. And most of us don't get that opportunity in life. We live these very comfortable lives. We live well within our comfort zones, and we have no need to be uncomfortable. And I quite like seeking out some discomfort to try and get out of those comfort zones once in a while.
Because I guess each time you do something like that, it just flexes. And you and me spoke about this a lot last time, that sort of resilience muscle.
Yeah.
That, it may as well be a muscle that every time you push it, it gets a little bit stronger.
Yeah.
And how, I guess, responses to things are completely different. That, if you walk out the front here and someone was hit by a car, and the neighbour comes out who has a pretty sedentary life, blah, 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 ambulances, go home. You wouldn't even think of it by the time you're home. It's just a thing where if you're not experienced to that, it's it can be the most traumatic thing ever.
Yeah.
And, dealing and, I guess, immersing yourself in situations of that where you're, flexing that muscle a bit is so important further on in life.
Yep.
Because I guess with like your lad, not being wrapped in cotton wool, being pushed, that that, and you spoke, and you're well more versed in it than myself, but at critical times growing up, that this is where things can really be developed and instilled. That might be 20 years in the future where he's like, oh shit, no, I will push a little bit harder on this.
Yeah.
And that could be the difference between failure and success. Probably isn't. It's probably the last 20%, not the original 80% given.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And what you were talking about before is something that we talk a lot about in this book that we're writing. We're talking about that domain-specific competence where you build skills in a set area, and then you're very resilient in that area. You can approach that task or that stress, and it's not stressful for you. Like an accountant can do a tax return, and that's not stressful. Whereas if I sit down and try and do my own, that would be horrendous for me.
Yeah.
But if you start to demonstrate competence in a series of different domains, and you start to see, well, hey, when in the example of you're in the gym and you can push a little bit further, and you start to think, well, what else can I push? And then you choose a different domain, and then you try and push a little bit further, and then exactly like you said, you start to build this global resilience, and that's what we're terming adaptation, where you can take this novel stress, and it's this situation you haven't approached before, and like, say, for instance, probably anyone who's had a degree of army training, even if they haven't had anything other than basic army first aid, could be first on scene at a car crash and probably meaningfully engage there. You know, they could, even though they don't know the higher level medical type stuff that might come in handy, they could think, well, you know, we need to render this scene safe. Let's turn off the car for a start. Let's drag this person out of the car. Let's send someone up there to stop traffic. And, you know, they could approach, because they've been given a set of skills in their military training that they can then adapt to a novel set of stressors. And then, yeah, like you said, if you can start to push yourself in any one direction, I think that breaks down barriers in your mind that then if you would adapt that across to another domain of your life and think, oh, well, maybe I can edge a bit further forward here or a bit further forward here, and before you know it, you're starting to progress in all sorts of areas.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'm trying to do more and more, is push in different areas and see, and I guess see feedback of where I go. And I guess it's a beauty of, I guess, social media as well, to, you know, not cater to the crowd, I guess, but see responses on a big level. And it's so it's easy with a large following, you know, and you have a bigger following than myself, but seeing what hits and what doesn't, and seeing numbers, and, you know, you like float around, oh, that didn't really hit, and why wasn't that, you know, and there's a lot that goes into the algorithm of stuff too. But that struck a nerve with people, or this didn't. And I guess you look at the science one of why did that go and why didn't it? And why did that make conversation and why did it not? And it's funny, you look at the algorithm, and no one really knows it, but people talk a lot about the most important thing is engagement through making conversation out of it. So it tends to push things of like comments first, because they're like, well, someone's engaging, not just like liking it, because people just like and move on. But if someone comments on it, and even if it's negative, it's somewhat engaging people in this. And why do people not like it, or why do they? Looking at social media like that, I'm like, oh, fuck. Especially because we both have a pretty big capture, I guess, of people from all walks. It's funny seeing what resonates and what doesn't.
Oh, it is, isn't it? That just made me think. When I was pretty new to the social media game, I was pretty fresh out of the army, and I didn't have any profiles or anything, because it just wasn't a thing. And I'm a bit of a bloody Luddite. I'm slow to embrace technology, to be honest. And I'd written an article that I'd titled "Why I'd Rather Be Shot by an AK-47 than an M4." That was the title of this article, and it was just designed as a really precursory introduction to terminal ballistics, and just looking at the different wounding profiles between different velocity rifles. And it used a couple of case studies that were not comparing apples and apples directly. So there was an AK wound that was through and through, and an M4 wound that had actually hit bone. And so, I mean, and I spoke about that in the actual article, and I didn't expect this to have much reach at all. I think I might have written it for TACMed, and then which at the time was pretty small, but we were just putting a bit of material forward from our lessons learnt cumulatively in tactical medicine. And this thing got picked up by SOFREP, so one of the US sites, and then Business Insider picked this thing up as well and ran it as a story. And so it ended up getting near on 1 million views from Business Insider, and it sort of took on this life of its own and really engaged the US, gun fraternity, which is a pretty passionate group, and there was a lot of positivity, but there was a lot of hate as well.
Really?
And then there was someone would comment, and then 4 other people had ripped them apart, and they sort of it wasn't all directed at me by any stretch. It was people ripping each other apart in the comments, but it just spiraled into this thing. And it was, like I said, I was pretty new to the game, and I remember I'd posted it. And then I'd hopped on a flight, and I'd gone over to Melbourne. And when I got off the flight at Melbourne, I had half a dozen messages on my phone, and I checked them. And one of them was from Jeremy Holder, the founder and the CEO of TACMed. And he's like, man, you got to check out what's going on online. and I've done it. It was just my first insight into that whole space, the social media space. And I guess it was a real insight into the power and the reach you can have on the internet. It wasn't all good. Like at that time, there was a lot of hate getting downloaded onto this, and a lot of people picking apart my interpretation of things, which was never the intent. It wasn't meant to be a physics lesson or a definitive explanation of terminal ballistics. It was just a broad brush. Here's what happens, and anyway. But it opened my mind to this idea that here's this incredible tool, being the internet and blogging and social media posts and podcasting, this sort of stuff, used correctly with the right agenda. It's a pretty powerful thing, and it's a interesting day and age that we live in. It's certainly very the day and age that my kids are, the world my kids are growing up in is a very different one to the one that I grew up in, and I think recognising that is important.
Well, I guess at least, and I'm probably a lot closer than you, but I guess you're an adapter of technology when your kids are immersed in it. So like you've taken on technology, but you know what it's like to write, and you know what it's like to do whatever. But I guess kids your kids' age, young kids, they're not adapting to it. They're born into it. Yeah. And it'd be interesting. There's a Netflix documentary, I can't remember what it's called, but it's on social media currently. Yeah. And the danger of it, I guess. And they're talking about, from a psychology point of view, how weird it is for us to have that reach, because you can't imagine a million people. We can say it, but you can't really think of it. And they're sort of talking about humans are good at keeping a friendship group, or friends, and then friends of friends, about 200 people we can actually keep track of, and know their names and faces, and sort of go from there. Where the average account might have 600 or 800 people, and then you have accounts of 20, 40,000, a million and up. And I'm saying it's such a weird environment for us to be in, for humans, where it doesn't, we can have the negativity feel like it's someone telling you to get stuffed, but not the positivity. Because I know if 100 people tell me, "Oh, you're fantastic," it doesn't really feel like someone walking up to them in the street and saying it. No. But if one person tells me I'm a dickhead, it feels the exact same as someone walking the street. It's such a weird dynamic. But also I know Jordan Peterson, again, he talks about it's weird to be anyone is only ever 2 steps from a million people. Let's say you have 1,000 followers, which is very common. And then one of your friends has a lot have 1,000 followers. You're 2 steps from reaching a million people. It's not that far. And him saying, don't ever think your word, especially on socials, isn't going to carry massively. Not very often, and I say this privilege as well. I've spoken before about the privilege of being able to speak to, I think I'm 21-ish thousand people. The privilege to speak to that many people a day it's never happened before. No one's ever had this, I guess, ability in human existence of 200,000 years to be actually able to do it. So, if a US president 30 years ago held a conference every single day, eventually 20,000 people wouldn't fucking tune in. They'd just not give a shit after a while. And it's a true privilege used correctly, of course, but it can also be used incorrectly. And it can be a major stressor on yourself. Like I've taken time off socials recently because it just became a lot, because I do actually legitimately give a shit about people. And it became like oh fuck. And I felt responsible for, I have a lot of younger guys getting into the army, going through shit and taking on some responsibility of, outside that normal group of a couple of hundred that you sort of, get in your tribe, I guess, your close, and then that expanding massively and it just being fucking overwhelming.
It's and we've spoken about this before, that and I know you see it like I do as an obligation. If someone sends me a message and takes time out of their day and feels that they want to reach out to me, and that my opinion is, if they value my opinion, I want to answer that, and I don't want to just answer it with an emoji. I want to try and, give them something meaningful back if they've sort of reached out like that. But as you say, if you're posting all the time and you're getting all that engagement, it becomes this stress, and that's not what it's meant to be. But and like you, I wax and wane with my social media engagement, and with this book project, I've wound right down to try and focus my energies on that, and not get to not I mean, distracted is probably not the right term, but just balancing my investment in those relationships online and sort of with getting this thing done and but yeah, I watched that same doco. I can't remember what it's called, but that Netflix social media doco, and there was some we watched it with our kids, and just it was a good opportunity just to talk to them about this world that, like you said, they've been born into. And for me, the internet didn't really become a thing until I was about 20 years old, and then there was all those sort of early years of dial-up internet and all that sort of stuff. And so I mean, I was a young adult before it really became a big thing. And I try and tell my kids that there was a world before the internet, and they just look at you blankly, like how can this be? But there's some fascinating stuff that doco draws out, and there's a good book. Gillespie is the author. I can't recall the first name, but called Teen Brain, that looks at that this as well, and the effects of the online, particularly the online world, on teenagers developing brains and their reward processing systems, the dopamine and serotonin and anxiety and depression, and this whole new world of online bullying and you know, all that sort of cyberbullying and those concerning things, and looking at suicide rates since the internet and all this, which has really concerningly gone exponentially through the roof. It's a real worry, but trying to raise kids in that age and get them to realise, and my eldest is at the point where, you know, it's some of his mates follow me on social media, which is it's a great thing to be aware of what I'm posting when your kids' mates are bloody following you on Instagram or whatever. That was a good eye opener when one of his mates said to me, "Hey, look, you know, I liked what you posted the other day." I thought, "Oh shit, what else have I posted?" I don't know that I want that. That idea that somehow having a couple of thousand followers is a metric for success is one that I really try and instill in my kids, that it's not. It's a fantastic thing, and yeah, it's great, but it's not like, you know, it's not like we've got tens of thousands of good friends that you could lean on in times of hardship. And this is the point we try and reach in the book, talking about the online presence and interaction is one thing, but it can't be a substitute for meaningful human relationships. You know, you can bolster meaningful human relationships online, sure, but you know, it's not a proxy for that. You know, meeting someone in the street, shaking hands, or having a beer, or, you know, sitting down with the chat like we are. You know,
it's a weird thing too, because I almost feel like the more followers I've got, it's almost like the less meaningful relationships I've got. Like, I know 4 or 5 years ago, at a different time, I was a young 19, 20-year-old digger too. But I seem to have so many friends. Now I've really gone down to few really close friends. You know, as people move on, and
of course.
But of course I have this massive following, and people are saying, "Oh, you're doing shit all the..." Well, not really. Like most of the time I'm hanging around the house with Willy in the gym by myself. You know, it's not a bad thing, but it's not. And it's we're the only generation too, the only people alive to have this, I guess, number metric of popularity. You know, anyone ever's had popular kids at school or in the whatever forever. But now there's a number to it, and that's fucking dangerous. Like I was in school, and social media was sort of getting traction, I guess. Yeah. But especially now with a number, and you would have people at school with, "I am better than you because I've got this," and it's like, well, no. And I think this is one of the reasons I get a bit of that stress from it too, about replying to everyone and making sure I put the effort, because I'm like, who the fuck am I to think I'm better than you because I've got a following? Like, that's just ridiculous. Like,
no, you're exactly right. And there was a point that resonated with me when I was watching that social media doc on Netflix, and I think it was a Facebook guy who was part of the team that developed the like for Facebook, and he said something along the lines of, we only ever saw it as this ability to share happiness and to sort of share joy, and he said that he'd never foreseen that it could possibly end up with people being depressed and being anxious and, heaven forbid, committing suicide, because they weren't liked, you know, and you mentioned something before about that fixating on that one negative comment, and there's a great there's a whole bunch of biases that we're all prone to as humans, and a lot of the time we don't know it, but when they get drawn into your conscious attention, you become far more aware of them happening. But there's one called negativity bias, where we do tend to fixate on the one negative in a you know, you might have done an exam and you've done really well and you've walked out of, but you've realized as you walk out you got that one question wrong, and then you're kicking yourself about that. You know, it's human nature to do that, and certainly I've found myself in years gone by guilty of that. With you'd put a post up and maybe, you know, a whole bunch of people would comment and say, yeah, that's great, or love this, or well done, or thumbs up. And then one dude hops up and just says, you know, you're a dickhead, or well done, idiot, you know, that'll never work, or something like this. And you're like, God damn you one person. And
literally,
it's hard not to take that to heart, isn't it? But no, I think I've learned to have a good laugh about them.
Yeah, it's just one of those things of socials.
Of course,
there's always going to be someone.
There's going to be some armchair expert.
Holy shit!
Yeah. I remember actually talking about that AK versus the M4 article, and there was some champ who hopped on and really there was a couple of really funny ones actually, because I'd spoken about the kinetic energy equation, which is that's kind of underpins terminal ballistics. It's, you know, Ke equals half mv squared, and it talks about mass, velocity, kinetic energy, how much energy you're dissipating into the targets, and it's the physics behind why a high velocity projectile wounds someone and how much damage it does. And I had all the scientific community jump on my interpretation of this, and I must have got something slightly wrong. I still to this day don't know how I ballsed that up, because I'm not smart enough to know the intimate details of that physics, but I slightly misinterpreted part of the kinetic energy equation, which offended the physics community, and they were quite happy to let me know that. Yeah. And then I had the gun nuts that were really offended by my generalization of an AK wound and an M4 wound, and they started to talk about, oh, what if it was this projectile, and what if you used this amount of grains of bloody whatever, and all this sort of, what about this ammo, and what about this, and if it was suppressed it'd do this, and you just like, and then I had one champ who said just flat out, that's not an AK wound. And I'm kind of like, I was there, man. Like, I can actually tell you beyond question that this is an AK. But he's like, no, he wasn't having it. He's like, you don't know what you're talking about. That is not an AK wound. So it's like, all right, man, you win. Like, yeah.
Fuck. So on that, why is it that you would prefer to be shot by an AK than an M4?
I mean, the premise of that
not
is
to trigger everyone on my podcast.
Yeah, here we go. Let's reinvigorate this one. But in a nutshell, so AK-47 they're both high velocity, so they're both over 2,000 foot per second muzzle velocity. The AK-47 is about 2,300 foot per second, whereas the M4 is about 3,200 foot per second. So it's about 1,000 foot per second faster, and it's the M4 round, or the 5.56, you know, the 5.56 by 45, the Steyr/M4, anything that shoots that particular round, it's a much smaller, much faster projectile, and so it causes a lot more. So it's, when you look at that kinetic energy equation, which the scientific community was quite keen to tell me I'm not getting entirely right, but what I do know is that you've got mv squared, and so the velocity component of it is squared, and so it's the velocity of the round that really influences the kinetic energy as opposed to the mass. And so when you've got a 5.56, so an M4 projectile, it's smaller but traveling significantly faster, lower mass but much higher velocity, and so it imparts a significantly more kinetic energy. It's also got a different wounding profile as a generalization, so an M4 round or a 5.56 will tend to go in a fairly small distance before it will yaw, so it'll turn sidewards, and if it's going fast enough when the projectile turns sidewards, it will actually shear open. So there's a soft spot, a weak spot where the projectile is crimped into the casing to seal it in the bullet, and that tends to fracture open, and then the bullet tends to disintegrate. And I mean, these are all generalizations, but it has a far higher tendency to to fragment. The AK round has a tendency to just plough straight through, so the actual projectile stays intact. I don't think I've ever seen one fragment in my experience, which isn't super extensive, but I'm sure it does happen. I didn't see it, but it was far more likely just to push straight through someone, and it tends to travel through a lot more tissue before the bullet starts to tumble. And as I said, I never saw one fragment. It generally punches in and out. So the long and the short of it is with the M4 round, like bang for your buck. What am I trying to say here? Shot at the same range with the same weapon system. So say you cop around from 150 metres away with an AK, it's much more likely to plough through, whereas the M4 is much more likely to yaw, disintegrate, and cause impart a whole bunch more kinetic energy and do a whole bunch more damage. And so that was the premise of that article, and it was based on things like ballistic gelatin trials and typical wounding profiles of those weapon systems. And then I did actually put in there, however, it doesn't always happen like this. You can get hit with an AK, it can be disastrous, and M4 can just go straight through. But it was just, as I said, it was meant to be a broad brush. Here's what kinetic energy looks like. Here's why a high velocity gunshot wound causes so much damage. Here's the typical wounding pattern of AK. Here's the one for M4. Therefore, I'd rather be shot by an AK. That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then everything kind of went from there with people ripping it apart.
Just bolt triggered yanks in the comments.
Yeah, no, it did, but it was good. I mean, it was overwhelmingly a positive response, but there was this other cohort that had actually, and I hadn't really thought of this, and I hope it didn't come off as insensitive, but there was a whole bunch of people who had actually been shot by AKs who hopped on and said, well, hey, I've actually been shot by an AK and it wasn't that much fun. And so, I'm like, oh, geez, I hadn't really thought of that when I wrote this, and it kind of stirred up a bunch of responses that I hadn't anticipated.
Yeah, Jesus. And I guess what we'll finish on, because this is, I guess, a big one that's related, I guess, in my community and close mates, whatever, is selection for special forces. I guess any experiences and tips and whatever for them moving forward into that. I guess anything you'd give to young guys if they came to see you, which, of course, I've come with a couple of guys to see. But a lot wouldn't have the same privilege, I guess, geographically based, whatever. I guess where you'd put on it, what you'd say to them.
Oh, I'm about 100,000 words into a book on that as well, and that's been a work in progress for years now, which has as much been me just having pennies drop over the years about what I didn't do well or what I think people can do better. And a lot of that is around the broad brush. I feel that the selection process is more a psychological process than it is a physical process. Now, that's not to underestimate the physical side of things. Of course, it's very physically taxing, but I mentioned before, the vast majority of people who withdraw at own request will do so well before they're physically exhausted or before their body gives up on them. So, that basically tells you that it's their mind is kind of giving up on them, or they're just mentally defeated by the course, because it is so overwhelming, and that's when I say that's across the board. It doesn't matter if it's a 4-day police tactical group selection course or a 3-week, Army Special Operations course, or the in-between, a 10-day, naval clearance diver course, if that CD thing's still 10 days. I mean, the concept is exactly the same. It's this horrendously overwhelming stress that is imposed on a person, and you can build a physical resilience against the physical component of that, and a lot of people do that pretty well. But in my opinion, that's the easy part, getting physically ready for selection, and normally there's some fairly clearly defined physical benchmarks. So you need to do a 20 clicker in this time, a 3.2 in that time, this amount of chin ups, this amount of push ups, and you need to put that in under the perspective or in the perspective of doing it when you're already a bit knackered. So I think that's, a bit of a trap. It's if you can do a 20 clicker fresh just under the time required, then you're probably not there physically. You need to be able to do that when you're fatigued. But I think the thing that people really miss is the opportunity to psychologically prepare themselves and to build that psychological resilience. I've actually just in the last 6 months been thinking of this from a whole different perspective as well, in light of the fact that we know that the human brain doesn't develop properly until we're into our mid-20s. And a lot of the areas that are slow to develop, particularly in males, are the impulse control areas, which accounts for why teenagers do a lot of dumb shit and young blokes in their early 20s with their licenses do a lot of impulsive acts that end disastrously. So, I mean, those linkages between your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala that control that impulsivity don't get fully developed until your mid to late 20s. And so that's why we see those behaviours in most people starting to settle down by the time they reach full adulthood. And you look at the average person who's stepping up for selection, they're in that age and stage where their brain isn't fully developed, and at the core of not withdrawing from the selection course is impulsivity and impulse control, and this ability to control that response that either overwhelmingly wants you to have a fight or flight response, wants you to tell a bloody DS how you actually feel about them, wants you to just get the hell out of that course because it's so offensive. And universally, the people who sign themselves off the course, the second they've had a chance to have a feed and have a, maybe a bit of a rest and stop doing what they're doing, regret it immediately. And so it's about trying to build that space between, I think it was Viktor Frankl talks about this mindfulness as being creating space between stimulus and response, and that's what this is all about. It's trying to train that build that space, stay in that moment, and not just have this knee-jerk reaction. And we know that you can do that through meditation and mindfulness. I mean, the jury is overwhelmingly out. What's a jury anyway? The evidence.
I know it's trying to make
overwhelmingly that we can do this. We've got the neural imaging studies that say if you meditate, it will strengthen these connections between your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala. It'll shrink down your amygdala's action, so it will give you more impulse control. And so, the number one thing that I tell people nowadays is meditate. And it's a weird thing, people will look at you funny. I've had a few people say, "No, I'm not doing that," because it's not well aligned with the Western warrior culture.
No, not at all.
But you think, and then you use the example, you say, well, do you reckon a Shaolin monk could pass selection? They're like, of course. And you're like, well, what's a Shaolin monk do? And they're like, well, they meditate and they practice mindfulness and they do all these incredible feats where they can push their body beyond, anything that we can imagine. You talk about the samurai, these cultures, these warrior cultures that get it and use this mindfulness meditation as preparation to optimize themselves as warriors, but somehow we've lost it. It's not, and I think we need to bring that back, because not only does it improve your chances of being successful in selection, then it improves you. And there's some great studies looking at particularly police groups, looking at mindfulness meditation and all these other resilience programs, and not only did it improve overall well-being for these cops, it reduced their stress levels, cortisone levels, it improved their family relationships, but it also there was in one particular fairly powerful study, it decreased inappropriate use of force, it decreased on-the-job accidents, and it was all these metrics that actually would be more tangible if you stand in front of a bunch of blokes who are special operators or who are police or who are military and say, this will make you feel better and it'll make your relationship with your wife, all these sort of things that are good but maybe not appealing to that culture, particularly young blokes. But if you stand in front of them and say, hey, if you meditate, it will make you a better operator, it'll make you less likely to use inappropriate force, it'll make you less likely to have an accident on the job that will kill one of your mates, that's the stuff that's going to engage them, And when I get a chance to talk to police tactical groups, which I fortunately do once in a while. That's the hook that you get in with. But so, I mean, coming back to your question, lots of mindfulness meditation, lots of attention to the sleep, track your sleep, look at what different diets are doing. Look at blue light is one thing that I'm very big on. Gut microbiome, that whole gut-brain axis. We've spoken about intermittent fasting and ketosis and just becoming metabolically flexible, I think is very important. I'm a big fan, as we discussed, of breathing activities and a thing called static apnea charts that they use for freediving is what they've been developed for, but I don't do it in the water. I think that's you need to be very careful with that and do that. Don't hold your breath underwater. I had a good mate nearly drown doing that, but and people do die doing that. But certainly static apnea tables on dry land, the cold water stuff I think is great for psychological resilience. Learning about things surrounding group formation dynamics, I think something that people go in with the wrong attitude, myself included, into selection, is seeing other people on the course, other candidates, as competition, and that you must beat the other person, and what they're missing there is this opportunity to come together as a cohesive group. And if you can look at those other candidates as the quicker you can form a cohesive group, and the resilience that comes with being a group, that is then the enemy in that setting is the course, and to a lesser extent the DS, but if you can unite against the course, then you're much more likely that everyone gets to the end, and then you're a much better chance of getting picked up. And I think people miss that, and they tend to sort of lock horns with other candidates and have this competitive attitude, and that will just decrease the likelihood of coming together as a group. Conflict management strategies. I think a lot of people float through life not knowing how they manage conflict. It just happens, and they haven't given much thought as to different strategies that might be better or more appropriate. I think all of those sort of things, looking at your personality type, how that fits into a group. And I think when you look at the people that step up to selection, there's a certain filter that gets used to pre-select people to go on a course. And often you end up with a lot of people that are a pretty similar personality type, and then you're trying to make a group out of them. And so in society, we've got all types, and we form ourselves as this big societal group or subgroups that are going to have all different types. But if you grab a whole stack of alpha males, mostly from grunt battalions, and chuck them all in one group and say, there you go, play nicely together, of course there's going to be friction. There's going to be that establishment of a pecking order. There's going to be egos. There's going to be people coming in with these preconceived ideas of where they should fit in that group based on where they fit in the old group, and that's not a good way of going about it. We spoke about complexity theory and complex adaptive systems, and this mindset that you need to bring into a complex environment, which selection is a perfect example of. It's non-linear, it's unpredictable, it's not reproducible. It's cause and effect is not in play. You can do something one day and get one response, do something the next day, get a completely different response. And that's by design. It's meant to unsettle you, and test you psychologically. And so rather than try and approach it as a problem that you can have all the solutions to, and learn about how to strip an AK and tie a knot and make a raft out of 44-gallon drums, all these predictable things, the problem with going in with that attitude is that the second you get thrown a curveball, you don't know how to deal with it. So it's more about, sure, learn all those skills that you might think you need, but expect to be thrown curveballs, and build a mindset and a set of strategies and an adaptability to approach novel tasks, and then you won't get caught off guard. Whereas the second, if you're trying to approach it from a complicated perspective where you can actually break everything down to component skills and learn them, the second you get something that you don't know, you're knackered. Whereas if you look at it for what it is, a complex system, and build that adaptability and that mindset to approach novel tasks, and a set of skills to break down a novel task into something approachable, That's a far better way of doing it, and that sort of starts to come into the growth versus fixed mindset. And there's some fantastic stuff by a lady by the name of Carol Dweck, talks about mindsets and growth mindsets, and that's another thing that I encourage people to look into and move towards a growth mindset, to be intrinsically motivated, so look hard at their motivations for why they're doing this, and make sure that they actually have that inner burn to do this for themselves, and they're not just doing it because they want to grow a beard and paint their rifle. I mean, that's there, and that's fine, sure, want to do that, but you need to, that's not going to be the thing that gets you through your third week of a selection course. That's not enough. It needs to be that deep desire to personally prove to yourself that you can have a go at this, or to chase that goal for your own self-mastery, rather than what someone else might think of you if you were with whatever unit you're going for.
Yeah.
So, I mean, man, I could talk all night. I know I've sort of gone off. I'm very passionate about that. As I said,
it's bloody fantastic.
I've started thumping a stack of that together, and I did the word count on it just the other week, and it's over 100,000 words, and I'm not really even close to finished yet, to be honest. So at some point, I'll once this current book thing's done, I'll wrap that up and throw it out there, because I think that's well, hopefully, that's another thing where maybe I can reach a few people and a few points will resonate, and it might help them on their path, and that's the hope there.
Yeah, and you mentioned about meditation building into something, say selection, but that can translate to a variety of things. Yeah. How would that look? How would you, go about it? Is it focusing on your breathing and whatever, or?
There's a stack of different ways of going about it. It's a good question. I think the best point of entry, in my opinion, and you probably, ask a bunch of different people, you'll get a bunch of different opinions, but there's some really good guided meditation apps that you can get. And when I kicked off this process, and I still use it to this very day, there's an app called Calm, so CALM, and it's got a daily Calm. It's a 10-minute guided meditation, and I think that's a great way to start. And it guides you through that process, and it is very much centered on focusing on your breath and just trying to block out external thoughts, and when your mind wanders, bringing it back in. And this is the whole concept of meditation, and then it goes from there. But I think that's a great, for anyone who hasn't approached it before, that's a great way to start. It's only 10 minutes out of your day, and then I found I did that for some time, and then I started looking for a bit more and started to sort of stretch it out. And once you get a feel for the concept and start to get a little bit better, which takes a lot of time. I mean, it's the human mind just wants to wander, and it wants to go hell west and crooked. So it is about being kind to yourself and not rushing the process, and it sort of sneaks up on you. Well, I found you sort of think this is doing nothing, but then all of a sudden I realized, well, hang on a sec, no, I'm keeping my cool with the kids, and I'm a lot sort of more got a lot more gratitude for this, and I'm enjoying that, and I'm engaging more here, and I'm present there. And so it just sneaks up on you, and it's that like anything, it's that habitual, just keep doing it, and slowly but surely you notice those changes. It doesn't happen quickly.
Yeah. Well, that's 3 hours and 3 minutes. I reckon we're pretty good.
Bloody hell!
I know we could
go for 10. Probably, your listeners are probably at this point thinking,
that'll stop us having.
Does this guy ever shut up?
That'll stop us having a part 3, because this is part 2 of it.
Yeah.
And eventually, part 3 would be good once the new project book's out.
Yep.
That'd be a good one to.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
We'll have to get Ben and Tim down to Adelaide and chuck some fucking new chairs in here and.
Yeah, that'd be a good get together. Let's make that happen.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah, they'd be stoked to do that.
Plan on them coming down here, because I can set it all up for everyone. That'd be good fun. That'd be like an 8-hour bloody.
Yeah, that'd be a tough sesh. Yeah.
Might bring everything to the Voodoo Lounge.
Well, that sounds like a plan. Yeah, stock it up with supplies.
Everything here's movable. Easy. No, Dan, thank you very much. And if there's anything you need to plug, whatever, go for your live.
Nah, look, I think we've probably exhausted it there. Yeah, no, that'd be great when the book's a bit closer to fruition to remind your audience about that one. But I really appreciate your time, mate. It's great to catch up.
No, always. Righto. Well, thank you very much.
Pleasure, mate. Cheers.
And